right, are we on here? Not yet? Okay. We're gonna call the policy committee meeting for March 19th to order. And attendance-wise, present Dr. Russell,
Yes.
Keller, Dr. Weston, Mr. Clelland, Mrs. Benza. And there are a couple folks from the public also here. And so we will move right to section 2, which is the policies and the review cycle. Dr. Russell.
Thank you. So this evening, we're going to go back to our review cycle, and we have a review cycle for our policies where we review policies every 6 years. And oftentimes when we select policies to put in the review section, they're ones that are the oldest, and also we try to make them or have them be connected to one another. So these tonight are focused on curriculum and some of the aspects of the curriculum work. So there are no recommended changes for Policy 100, Comprehensive Plan, or 102 Academic Standards. They're very straightforward policies. In Policy 105, I'll bring that up, there is one very simple revision that's been proposed to this policy. Under definition, instead of just indicating we want our students to achieve a proficient level, I have recommended or above be added. Also advanced. So it's a very slight change, simple revision. That's the only one I would recommend for that policy. And then in policies 138, which was reviewed by Dr. Champagne-Lee, who oversees our English language learners, there are no recommended revisions. And then in 205, postgraduate students, we'll take a look at that one. And because the law changed recently for special education students, they can actually attend school until their 22nd birthday. So we've made a revision there from 21 to 22 years of age. And those would be the changes that I would recommend in this group of review cycle policies.
Are there any comments or questions, any concerns about any of the language or the proposed revisions? Okay, seeing none, we will move along to section 3, policies from the PSBA PNN.
And there was no PNN since the last one that we reviewed and the policies that were part of that. So there are no policies in this section. So unless we get a PNN from PSBA, there wouldn't be policies in this section.
Alrighty, so local policies, section 4, Dr. Russell. Several have returned to us, and I think we have one addition from last month. Okay.
So I wanted to come back to policy 103 and the AR that's been developed in response to some of the questions and concerns around restroom use, locker room use. So if you look at the AR for policy 103, while it doesn't necessarily require board approval, I do want to be open and transparent with the board about what administration is considering. Some of the same information has been suggested and proposed in policy 907 for visitors. Again, trying to honor some of the concerns that have been brought forward and incorporate them into the language of the AR for policy 103, as well as policy 907 visitors. And you'll see the sections were copied and pasted from the AR for 103 that we've been working on for some time into the visitors policy 907. So I'm going to bring up policy 907 if that's okay. And I will call your attention to the visitor restroom access, locker room accessibility. There were comments and concerns at the last meeting about adults blending with students. in addition to having concerns around individuals of the opposite biological sex. So this language attempts to clarify more clearly or articulate more clearly some of what the district would expect to avoid students blending with adults in these settings.
Are there any comments or questions with regards to the language? Ms. Leonetti? I think that it's on.
Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Question, I read over this before I came here tonight, and my question is, it's only dealing with during school hours. Are we going to add anything to any of these policies that are going to deal with what the situation for the restrooms, locker rooms, and all those things will be after school hours?
So if you look at the last paragraph under locker room accessibility, it does indicate it specifies adults on site after school hours for community ed or building rental activities. So it does try to capture that with individuals who would be here, particularly for swimming. That's not uncommon. At times we do rent our buildings, that's less common, but swimming is the most common example of where students and staff or adults would be using restrooms and locker rooms. So that paragraph did try to capture that.
So, the conversation that took, I'm loud, it's getting me, trust me. The conversations that took place at the board meeting, the work session, and the policy meeting are not necessarily addressed in the updated AR or this. That touched on the question that was specifically being asked. So, for instance, this says, during school hours, any adult and or volunteer shall have access to the select single. Well, let's go back to the we'll stay on this locker room during the school day. Visiting adults, coaches or referees, etc., to any secondary school building are not permitted to enter the locker room unless accompanied by administrator. All that's saying is that they will be entered. They will be given access as long as they're allowed in by somebody, right? So the question that was specifically asked is, would a adult who identifies as a man, who identifies as a female but is actually a man, be given access to the girls' room? The answer is now yes, because they're going to be walked in there by someone that works at the school. That was the question that was addressed. It was asked at the board meeting, and so the answer is yes. They would be given access to it because they'd be chaperoned in by an adult.
Not be changing or engaging in the same space. So
Where?
hours shall not engage in changing clothes in the same spaces as students. Accommodations will be provided by PVSD administration.
Locker rooms have bathrooms.
Tell me more. What do you mean by that?
That's not me. This was the question that was posed by public comment at the policy meeting and at the board meeting.
What was the question?
I just asked, if an adult who was a transgender adult, would they be given access to the locker room or bathroom that they identify as? And we're saying here yes, because they'll be given access by a PVSD administrator and or athletic director.
I think if we take that a step further, the concern is changing in the presence of others, and especially students. That's what I heard loud and clear.
No, it was not changing.
Okay, then
Changing means I'm going to get changed, right? But if you're a coach talking to your team, they might be semi-undressed or
changing.
no, they're not in the changing room. They're just sitting there before a game or after a game. They're sitting there.
Opportunity for us to talk through that. What would the suggestions be to articulate that more clearly? When I say changing clothes, I mean students they're not fully clothed. That's inappropriate in the presence of adults. That's what the attempt is here. So let's talk through what would it say or could it say that would be more clear?
I don't think there would be a
I don't have
circumstance.
one. I don't have an example of that.
There was in Pennsylvania. There was in Pennsylvania where a tennis coach went where there was in Pennsylvania recently. It made headlines and went to court where a tennis coach changed their gender.
So,
And so asking me what would I think, that's moot because I already did that.
I think we're trying to make progress here
I
and
understand.
capture some of the concerns. So help us to know as a committee what else can we consider in this language to get it closer to, or at least to consider what it might say to address some of the concerns.
so are you proposing that there are activities besides changing and bathroom that are happening in the locker room? Pep talk or something? Is that the instance that you're meaning, that there would need to be a coach with students in a locker room scenario when they're partially clothed?
No, we have male coaches coaching very successfully female athletes.
Okay, so the male basketball coach goes into the locker. That would never be appropriate in my view to go into the women's locker room.
No, to my knowledge, no. But I don't know where they meet. Where do they go at halftime? I honestly don't know.
Go into the room across for the auxiliary gym.
Okay,
That's
so
not a
it's not a
changing
locker
area.
room. It's not a locker room. Okay. I am not aware of male coaches entering female locker rooms, unless, like Mr. Keenan mentioned, there's some extenuating circumstance, there's a safety hazard of sorts. I'm not aware of that.
But I think, Mr. Saylor, and this is my impression of what you're getting at. I wouldn't consider it appropriate, male or female adults changing with male or female children.
Correct.
Regardless of identity or anything else, I don't think that adults should ever be in a locker room setting changing with children ever. I'm not sure when that would happen.
Question on that then too, because if we're allowing kids in the school until 22, that's legally an adult. So are from 18 to 22, if that person identifies as transgender, are they not allowed in the opposite bathroom?
The only children that would be present on site in the district after their 18th birthday would be children identified with very specific learning needs.
Intellectual disabilities.
We have students who are 18 who are on. Yeah. Yep.
So, and I don't know the legality of, like, is there a 2-year buffer or something? Or, like, can an 18-year-old date a 16-year-old? I don't know the answer to that.
I'm guessing they can. I don't know how that holds
Do
up if
you
there
happen to
were
know the legality of
poor
that?
choice of the law under the law.
It's a +3 rule. Because you figure they're 18-year-olds in the,
We're not talking about dating. We're talking about.
no, I understand. So I guess that's what I'm getting at is to.
+3 under 16.
Those individuals on our sports teams would be able to have access as a student, as a member of the team.
Right. So
No, that hasn't been codified yet because the AR doesn't speak of that. The AR mentions bathroom, doesn't mention locker room. It's very vague on the locker room. It's vaguer than it was prior. The AR says that restroom.
Policy. Hold on. Let's pull up the AR.
AR says transgender and non-conforming students have restroom accessibility, but doesn't talk about locker room accessibility. No,
AR 103 that's posted?
restroom AR portion specifically says transgender and non-conforming students. The locker room accessibility doesn't mention that at all. So would a transgender student be given access to the locker room during the school day?
Yes, per policy 103. And any student who would prefer.
How come the AR doesn't say that? The AR is intentionally vague about this. the AR says restroom accessibility, specifically mentioning transgender and non-conforming students. The locker room accessibility does not mention it at all. It goes out of its way not to mention it. So then, in that case, why are we using terms like transgender and non-conforming students? And why don't we just get down to the a student has access to the locker room and/or restroom to whatever they identify as?
Aligned to their gender identity.
Aligned, okay.
Why are we using terms like transgender and non-conforming students if you just really wanted to say aligned to however they identify?
Why we have these helpful conversations. That's, I mean,
Oh, I'm not necessarily saying I agree with it. I'm just saying this AR goes out of its way in the locker room, and I talked about this when we voted on it. This AR goes out of its way to be extremely vague when it comes to locker room for some reason.
not voting on this. It's an AR.
I already voted. I voted no.
You're
But we
not
don't
voting
vote
on
Correct.
it.
I understand that. But what I'm saying, during that conversation, I already mentioned that the AR was specifically vague in terms of locker rooms. 2 board members said they liked that it was vague because they don't know how they feel about giving locker room access to transgender students. But we're stating now that if a student is transgender and non-conforming, they have access to the locker room, correct?
So, okay, let's back up for a second.
I just want to.
Let's back up for
yeah.
a second, Mr. Saylor. So when Dr. Russell was away on her
Conference.
conference,
Yeah.
was going to think retreat.
Vacation.
Yeah, she was vacationing. We were paying her to vacation. That's exactly right. So, just a little levity. So, the conversation that was the first time we looked at the AR. You took issue with contradiction between the language that was inserted that acknowledged locker rooms, because previously there was no acknowledgement of locker rooms at all. And hold on. And the language that you took issue with, I don't remember there being necessarily a conversation about it being vague. I remember the conversation that you said that it was contradictory, and that's how it sort of progressed to it needing to have more wordsmithing and revision to clean up some of the language. But when you initially put forward the AR and shared the additions, the way that I understood and remembered it was this originally, AR 1032, was specifically addressing transgender and nonconforming students, and then through conversation, it morphed into 103 students of a protected class. So I think maybe what Mr. Saylor is referencing is that there's some obsolete vernacular in pointing out only transgender and nonconforming when the AR is actually about students of a protected class. But out of context, what you're saying is that it's already been noted that you don't agree with it, but the language either
I called
needs
it
to be
discrimination light because it's not specific in the locker room. You're specifically saying in the AR that a student who identifies as a female who might be a biological male will have access to the restroom that they identify, but in the locker room, we're intentionally not touching that subject. We went into, well, if anyone feels the need to have privacy, we'll enhance that privacy.
I disagree with the intentionality piece of it, because I don't know that it was intentionally done that way, but that's your impression of how it's worded. So would you prefer the language to be struck, or would you prefer for the language to be revised? What would be your suggestion?
I think we should put in language what we're doing. So if the school district is allowing trans men access to the male locker room,
Trans men would be access to the male locker room. I'm following.
trans female access to the female locker room, then that's what this should stipulate. That's what it should say. Just like it says so with the restroom. It specifically goes out of its way to say the restroom, then it should just say restroom / locker room accessibility. Because the motion the board, the policy that the board retired, was locker room and bathrooms. So if you retire that to do the AR, then it should be specific. Because someone outside of this board meetings that watch, someone who just read the AR will come away saying they are specifically going out of their way to not mention the locker room and who gets access to the locker room.
We want it to be more of a replacement, which is I don't think what the intention was. I think the intention was to for the AR was to really give guidance as to the steps that are taken
Right.
should there be an infraction.
Right, and really also to call out, adults should not be changing with students now. You bring up a good point, Mr. Jaggers. Unless they are a student in the school district and a member of a team, an 18-year-old is going to be on a team with a 16-year-old, and we can't avoid that. However, the spirit of the language intended to mean adults that will be doing their children with them for swimming. Okay, they are in our locker room space. And so the intent of the language is to indicate to those visitors, you can't be changing in the same space with children. Now, we can't avoid it in school because we do have some 18-year-olds and some 16-year-olds on the same teams. So we could specify that unless a student enrolled in the school district and or a member of a team, something like that.
And if you want to start getting like, so we're not creating loopholes, locker rooms have showers. It just says changing clothes in this policy.
Well, it's not a policy; it's an AR.
No, it is, the policy is 907.
I was
Back
on,
to
I'm sorry,
907.
I was in
You-
103.
Yeah, me too.
But going, because we have both up, it says, coaches and referees on site after school shall not engage in changing of clothes. So they shouldn't showering either, right? If you want to, locker rooms have three purposes. It's a space for coaches, referees, and our players to meet. There are bathrooms and there are showers. So if you're creating a policy that says you're only going to be, used for X, you don't leave out anything else that's available in those.
I actually want to check with our athletic director about showering. I want to check to learn exactly what sorts of activities do occur in a locker room so that
But it's
we're
not about the activity; it's about the utility.
right. And
The utility is we have showers, so we should have laws about those showers.
I don't know the last time they were turned on. I just want to make sure it's a practical statement to incorporate. If they're not being used at all, I don't know that we need to go there. So I'll check into that.
Well, policy is not just for today; it's for tomorrow.
Dr.
Sorry.
Weston, Ms. White.
Go ahead.
I'm actually, as I was reading this prior to the meeting and listening to the discussion now, I'm actually wondering if some of these sections here, the paragraphs on restroom accessibility, visitor restroom access, locker room, would these be more appropriate as part of a policy rather than an administrative regulation? The admin regs, as we've kind of discussed before, the purpose of an admin reg is more to have like a standard operating procedure, an SOP, to tell what to do in case there is an incident of discrimination or harassment. The part from that heading on down where it goes through the procedure of what to do when an incident is reported, that to me falls into the spirit and intent of an admin reg. But the other parts, like I said before about restroom accessibility, these seem to be more policy language than admin reg language. And I think, it's been suggested that we should be looking into developing policy along this lines, and I think that's where a lot of this language should go. Whether we do it as this group or if a separate team is established to develop a policy, and I think that might be a more efficient way of doing it. Not necessarily a policy development group. We are to review and move policies going forward. But I think I've talked to you about this before. I think there does need to be some policy development around this area, and I think this is part of what should be included in that.
I'm not clear with all of this stuff. my first question is, why do we have a policy for visitors that's attached to the AR? Shouldn't it just all be together? I don't understand why this stuff is policy and the AR is, it just doesn't make any sense to me. And then when you're talking about the visitors up there, it really is just restroom access. The locker room accessibility is for the adults after school hours, but during the visitor restroom access doesn't address after school hours. So not just necessarily changing for swimming and stuff. Say, for example, people are coming to an event here, they're coming to a game, they're coming to a concert. What is the policy on that? It doesn't really, it's very vague. And with regard to transgender adults that are coming into the school or identifying as transgender adults, how do we know who's going in and out of our bathrooms after school hours? You really don't.
Don't know that. We don't. And,
And it's a scary thing. Yeah, I
it's
mean,
very
honestly,
right,
it
it's
is.
very
It's a scary thing being a woman, and say being here at a basketball game, going into the bathroom. You don't know who the heck is going to be in there because the school doors are open, and these policies aren't addressing any of that kind of stuff, and that's a concern.
If I may, just point out that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Russell, Policy 103 and the ARs associated with it are really the guidelines for managing the school building by staff, teachers, and administration during school hours in general.
Yes.
And then and we had discussed previous policy committees that when groups do use the buildings after hours, the folks that are responsible for those groups have agreements established with the
Right.
school district for the expectations of use.
That's correct.
So in terms of oversight of any facilities in the restrooms or the locker rooms, all of that would roll up to whatever agreement was established through use of the building, with perhaps the exception of a school-sponsored activity. But at that point, restrooms wouldn't be monitored by anyone in any fashion different than any other public space. Because we're not in charge of children, we meaning the school district, are not
Right.
in charge of children during those hours.
Right.
So it'd be just like going to like the Kimmel Center and seeing a concert, or the
That's right.
Citizens Bank and seeing a baseball game or something like that. You would have public access to public bathrooms, but there's no policing of them, per
Correct.
se.
That's correct.
But Dr. Weston's correct, because there was a rush to make this AR, and I just want to break down the AR by one protected class, individuals protected from discrimination based off of religion, right? We all agree it says that, correct?
Policy says that?
AR.
Yeah, yes, the protected classes, yes, as defined in Policy 103, yes.
Religion's a protected class. So now you go down back to restrooms. Students within this protected class. Now we're removing all other protected classes because we're now just talking about this protected class in the heading above, correct?
Yes, however,
So
based upon your previous comments, I think we're going to we're going to strike that.
because it's
I agree.
you tried to fit a bathroom policy in an AR on discrimination, and so where in this AR, because it specifically mentions religion as a protected class, where in this AR does religion fall in any of the vernacular?
So again, Mr. Saylor, when the AR, I don't mean to speak for your intention, Dr. Russell, but just to put some clarity around, you keep going back to the fact that it was rushed and rolled out quickly to replace.
No. It's
Hold on. That wasn't the issue. That wasn't the case. So I just want to put some context around what your proposition is. When this was originally presented, it was presented as AR2, transgender and non-conforming students. That's the way it was originally presented. And it was presented that way specifically to allow for the teachers and staff responsible for students in the building to know what steps to take to report on with the elimination of, don't shake your head, I'm explaining.
I'm agreeing with you. I've been there, but that's not what we're talking about today. We've been
But
presented
we are, because you
this
keep
AR.
referencing that this was rolled out quickly, but that's not accurate.
this document. This document
103.2 was not rolled out quickly.
This document is now guidelines for safety of protected classes.
So again, this didn't just happen. This is the original not the original one. This is the revised original, or revision to the original, that was made to be an umbrella for all protected classes. So
I
your
understand
point
that.
is, and okay, and I'm not mansplaining it to you or Laura
I don't know what
explaining
that.
it to you.
I don't know what that means.
I'm
but
of course
yeah.
you don't know what it means. Come on. Okay. Jason. What I'm explaining for the record is that if there is language, as you and both Dr. Weston and you, Mr. Saylor, mentioned, that does not fall in line with continuity of the intention, then this is the time to pull it out and create a policy associated with it.
Okay, here's the other suggestion I have, and I want to go back to your question because it's an important one. If we come out of the agenda and go into our active policies, which you have access to.
They're at the very
Okay, I'm going to
bottom.
show you. Okay, so let me demonstrate for you. You go to the district's website. I'm doing this right now, okay? And you're going to go to the school board tab, and you're going to go into board docs. Now, I'm logged in. I'm going to log out, okay? Because I have different privileges, and I'm going to go in the public site. This is what you're going to see when you click on board docs, okay? You're going to go in the public site, and then you're going to go into policies. And let's say we go to policy 103. This little symbol here means there are attachments, there are ARs. And so I'll show you where they are, though, because it is confusing, and it's a common question. So if I go all the way down to the bottom of the policy, this is where the ARs are. They're attachments. Now, I mentioned the last time that my administrative assistant is building an administrative regulations manual, just like the policy manual. But for now, we attach them to each of the policies. Now, yeah, that's where they are.
Not every policy has an AR associated
Right.
with it.
So where we have them, they're attached, and they are intended, as Dr. Weston mentioned, to serve as the standard operating procedures. How do you
Bless you.
uphold policy? But what I wanted to call everyone's attention to is that what we discovered, again, Ms. White sort of reviewed the whole purpose of developing this AR. It was really an effort to provide guidance in exchange for the retirement of 720, and also to make sure that if something happens in a bathroom, whether it's involving a transgender or not, that our teachers, our staff are responsive to that, and they know exactly what to do. That was its purpose. Now, what we discovered is that Policy 103 has two attachments that came from PSBA. And one indicates complaint procedures. That's the first one. It's called Attachment 2. Attachment 3 indicates, Title IX violations. I want to file a claim. That's based on something connected to sexual something or other. So it's discriminatory in nature. So my point is, we found that there are steps outlined by PSBA about what to do. Maybe we don't need 103 AR-2 that was developed anymore because we now have these two attachments from PSBA. Because if it's getting too blurry and lines are crossing, we're getting into the weeds. We don't want to be in the weeds with an AR. We can talk about that and see where we'd like to land as a committee. Yeah, sure.
Have purpose, and then everything else is a definition. Is that what we want? Is that what the meaning of the AR is? Literally everything after definition is definition.
No, we want guidelines or authority or something like that.
Right? Correct.
Yeah.
So let's assume guidelines would start when we get to visitors' restroom access or restroom accessibility, correct?
Correct, yeah.
So how, again, do we quantify protecting class of religion to what you have in the AR?
Or what if we just say students have access to the restroom that corresponds to their gender identity?
So I'll ask the question I asked at the board meeting. There are 5 cases, I think 5 right now, in the United States, could be more. You have a religious student who cannot take off their head covering in front of the opposite gender. That's a protected class. We're now telling that protected class that we'll give them a special accommodation to have access to the single restroom. That's our accommodation, correct? Because we can't afford them the knowledge to know that there won't be another protected class in the bathroom.
Why that becomes a challenge for that student in the restroom in a
Some
public.
religions don't allow you to take off your headscarf in front of the opposite sex. It's an actual question. Not at Perkins Valley, but in other areas, yes. I think in Maryland, I think in Ohio and Florida. I mean, we do have students that wear burqas in Pennsylvania. I don't know if there are any students that have a full burqa in PV, but there are students in Pennsylvania. There are students in Cheltenham that wear a burqa. There are students in Cheltenham and in Abington, and I don't know if we have any Orthodox Jewish students in our school district, but there are rules with religion to headscarves and when they can be taken off and in front of whom.
Yes, in order for that to be an issue in this hypothetical, because it's hypothetical for us, in talking through this AR and the consequence, there would be some things that need to be true, right? The individual that has the need to have a religious accommodation based on their belief system would need to know that the person that they were directly in front of in the restroom or locker room is indeed a biological male.
Sure. Listen, it's a far-fetched hypothetical that's real in some school districts, not ours. This is my problem with using the term protected class, which is why I think it should be stripped, and we should go with what Dr. Weston said is you should be developing a transgender nonconforming policy, not using it under the context of protected class, because there are other protected classes that's the purpose of 103. The purpose of 103 is not to have a transgender policy. It is to protect protected classes, all of them, not some of them. And as I mentioned at the board meeting, not to separate and say one protected class is better than the other. That's why you should have a policy that stipulates what your policy is. You're trying to you're trying to use your discrimination as your adjunct to creating the policy. But when you mention terms like protected class, how do you protect, protected class is a lot in there. How do you correlate that with what you're saying here?
I completely agree, and actually agree that the sentence should be rephrased to state students shall have access to the restroom that corresponds to their gender identity and eliminate that protected class phrase. I agree, and you're right in that the AR for 103 was developed in an effort to support and address some of the concerns that had been brought forward with policy 720. And maybe there's a better path, and maybe it's the path to develop a standalone policy. Again, that's for the committee to discuss, and administration can be tasked with looking at some of those examples out there, those models out there, and bringing them forward.
Like you're suggesting, then if we had a separate policy for transgender and gender expansive students, that we would take out gender and gender identification from from AR 103, and I'm not sure I would agree with that. We are not the only school district that has gender and gender identification in our policy 103, and
As a protected
Oh,
class.
I see, as an example of a protected class. No, I'm not suggesting that. I want to be clear. Thank you, Dr. Weston. My suggestion is under restroom accessibility, you see it on the board, is to change the first sentence to read, students shall have access to the restroom that corresponds to their gender identity, consistently asserted at school.
Right.
And to eliminate the title, as Mr. Saylor has pointed out, transgender and nonconforming students, to eliminate that, to strike it, so that it is more general around safety of all students, and particularly because it's connected to 103, those in a protected class.
Dr. Weston, I'm not trying to remove what the board voted on. I'm trying to ensure that what you have enshrined in an AR that's connected to a policy meets what that policy specifically is. To answer your specific question, Fairfax County is the latest school district, which is in Virginia, to have the lawsuit. Fairfax County Public Schools believes that its policies and regulations override the Virginia's constitutional protections for religious beliefs based off of discrimination. So, yeah. That was March 7th. That lawsuit was filed, but that's I think either the 5th or 6th so far this year in state. So the reality is, again, not to use terms like protected class, because that is a large grouping.
I agree. I think valid points. And maybe we need to look at 907 again to make sure it aligns to where we are currently as a group in our thinking.
Wait, I sent you the article. Yeah.
Back at a visitor's policy, individuals that come into our building, this is in the community section, and language that is intended to guide restroom and locker room use. So, what else do we need to think about here?
Around 907? No, I do not.
No, some of our questions were mostly about just sort of legal issues about liability, having to do with the school putting this in writing, and then for things that you can't control, which let's say have nothing to do with identification. You know, it's just indecent exposure. A boy going in and flashing the girls, or a girl, whatever. in a situation where they shouldn't. And then, I don't know, would law enforcement be involved? And so we're just. I mean, these are not before. This is not before us now. I mean, obviously, right now. Well, I don't know whether I'm just talking, I guess, about PV students on PV teams, but it could happen in any facility. You have a female locker room, and well,
After school, like during an event, that's
I mean, I imagine that this AR and that whatever policy we had in place or have in place, policy 103, does not change the underlying possible criminal liability for indecent exposure.
Yeah, and it could be inadvertent.
That's all.
It might not even be purposeful, but then someone could be accused of.
I think what you have to, I think sometimes everyone needs to understand is a policy to AR is an allowance. It's not a stopgap, meaning we have a policy that says Jason Saylor can't use the third floor bathroom. That's the policy. It's not a preventative measure. It's just saying this is the allowance. This is as far as we allow, right? So in the case of an indecent exposure, you could put in the policy a student may not expose themselves to another student. That's what's not, and that's telling you that's what's allowed or not allowed. It doesn't stop the incident from happening. So in the case of an after-school activity, that's why there are school police officers, coaches, referees, and security guards, the adults that handle those aspects of an event. Like I can tell you, as a former PIAA ref, if I'm reffing the basketball game and there's something like that going on, there's a commotion, the game comes to a halt. We saw it here in our school district and how great everybody was. There was an issue during a basketball game in the hallway. Adults put themselves by the doors, shut down the snack stand, let everyone know inside, hey, we're all inside for a minute. The referees were told what was going on. Everything was confined, right? We have rules, procedures. Somebody broke those rules and procedures, right? So they're just, policy now, it's the allowance. And what's the acceptable allowance for something to happen? If something like that happens, that's where someone goes and tells the adult of the day, the on-duty officer of that day, which is security, school police, teacher, referee, snack stand supervisor, anyone that might be there working the game or event.
Though, I guess what I really, as a parent, keep coming back to is then that goes back to behavioral expectations and consequences, and that wouldn't live in these policies. That lives in student. I don't know what the number is. I wrote it down. Yeah. Does it and should that then be something that we? Is it 235 rights and responsibilities, or is it?
Yeah, they have that. If you attend an event at the school and you break a school policy, you then you potentially have an opportunity to face the principals and get some type of loss
Based on the consequence for that particular incident. So with regard to Mr. Keenan, your point about indecent exposure, if that occurred during school hours or after school hours and it was reported, then that student would then be subject to.
And Ms. White, we're talking about it next, the vaping policy. It's the
So
same thing.
vaping is one particular, but in terms of behavioral expectations, which I realize vaping is its own thing, but
Yes.
Handbook does.
the handbook
Yeah,
does. It
that
guides
is
back
the,
to the
that
handbook.
is the AR.
It's a leveled tier system
Right.
of
Not right for the purposes of everyone. It is a tiered system that with tracking associated with it for each student. So is that then something that we should really look at making more robust, or revisiting and just refreshing our minds on the language, or and I continually say that I've been saying this pretty consistently. The concerns that I keep hearing being raised all come down to the expectations of behavior um, associated with all of these different subjects.
So I think, and I agree with you, that's what I'm hearing, and I've heard that repeated by individuals. I don't know that there are gaps in our policy language. I think we would really have to dissect select policies to identify gaps. Right now, I'm not sure they exist. They're not
Holes, glaring
right.
holes.
They're not. But that could be something that we could look at and consider more thoughtfully. Supplies and equipment.
So within that, all of like a hypothetical scenario would technically be covered
That's
because
correct.
it's against the law for you to indecently expose yourself.
That's correct. That's
Okay.
correct. So that's what I mean when I am not aware of gaps in policies that allow students a loophole like that
Right.
particular example. I would think,
Ties them all
yeah, I
together.
would think so.
So
Yeah.
I guess that my only point in like looking at the language to make it more robust is not necessarily because there's a hole, but perhaps it needs to be more
To
explicitly.
reassure?
Yeah.
To reassure
In other
people?
words, I mean, short of going through every single policy and reading
Mm-hmm.
them all, they all cross-reference.
They
in a,
do.
you know, not. And so then, I guess and this is kind of where I first was looking about the ARs, is that it's kind of like a bunny trail. You know, you think to yourself, well, oh, okay, well, if this happens, well, I go to this policy. So you read this, but then you really go to the handbook. So, in terms of navigating um, the knowledge,
That is one of your overarching major responsibilities, is to develop policy. Most of our policies come from the state. So they have been started or initiated by PSBA and their legal team. We have the flexibility. You have the authority as a board to revise them, to fit, maybe to customize to our district. But most of these policies are policies, if you look up Souderton Area School District, Methacton Area School District, Springford School District, you're going to see the same ones and the same language. Handbooks will look a little different. How do you uphold policy in the language of a handbook? That's going to look a little different, but probably very similar at the same time. But if it would reassure individuals, and if there's a way to make it more robust, we can absolutely look at a policy like this one that really gets to the heart of accountability. This is what you're held accountable to if you are a student in the school district using our facilities. Yeah.
Maybe again, it's just me not understanding. Why do we have policy 907 but then an AR? Wouldn't it make sense to have the AR be a policy as well? As there are legal differences between the two of them? And what are those? Like, why do an AR for something like this and not put it in as policy? That I'm trying to figure that out in my head. I've been trying to question that for a while. It's not making sense.
And I wanted to address that when you asked it a few minutes ago. So the policies are developed by the board. That AR that I've been talking about, or we've been referring to, connects to policy 103, not policy 907, but there is overlap in there.
Addendum, basically, the AR?
not an addendum.
It is administrative regulations are developed by the administration, and they communicate or attempt to communicate in an understandable way how to uphold policy. And that they are intended to be read by staff, by community, by parents. Sometimes an AR, an administrative regulation, is a reporting form. Sometimes it's a series of steps to follow that make sure people know how to uphold the policy. So ARs are developed by administration and they can be changed. They're not approved by the board. It's our job to make sure we communicate to everyone effectively the rules and regulations in the district. And that's what policy
Has
communicates.
the same weight as a policy,
No.
meaning legal-wise, so say for example, in a lawsuit situation, would it be the same thing?
No, different weight. No. Mm-mm.
And what weight is that? What would the weight be? What do you mean?
Weight's on the policy. The policy is a reflection of laws at the state and federal level, or local level even.
Have all that together in a policy rather than an AR?
So again, if we go back to policy 720, when policy 720 was retired, this was an effort on the part of administration to speak to some of the concerns that still existed.
And to empower the
Ri-
staff
right.
and the teachers with the knowledge of what they needed to do in order to protect protected classes.
Because that was a concern that came out of, if you get rid of policy 720, we're worried about what might happen in restrooms. We're worried about the choices on the part of our students. So,
Well,
bring-
wait. That's not necessarily accurate.
Okay.
The worry was not what. Yes, there was worries about what would happen if you got rid of policy 720, but it wasn't the worry that was addressed in the AR. Mm-hmm.
Dr. Russell has proposed is that that she has had with teachers, staff, the union, et cetera, is that they were looking for guidance,
and the title
So
was
worry
changed.
is not, an AR is not for the parents' worry. Dr. Russell's job is to run every building full of teachers and
Teachers worried what would happen to the bathrooms if policy 720 went away?
No, and I, just to go back to the point, that I heard concerns out of the conversations around retiring 720. The AR 103 was an effort to really review, this is what's expected when it comes to safety in our schools. In response to removing this policy during those discussions, I heard people feeling concerned about that. So this was an attempt to honor those concerns and articulate, this is what we do if something goes on in a restroom or a locker room that's not acceptable, or someone gets hurt, or an unsafe situation is created. Right, it is sometimes for parents. Yes.
The
that's
parents'
exactly right.
issues are not being addressed. The parents' concerns are not being resolved. They're not being heard, they're not being acknowledged, they're not being resolved.
addressing issues as you're presenting them. And that's okay, but that's not what the
Well,
agenda
you
is.
said that the AR was to address the concerns of the teachers.
Said was that and we explained this the very first policy meeting afterward. We talked about the differences between policies and ARs. And ARs are developed to empower teachers to uphold policy. And so the content of the AR, as Dr. Russell developed it, was to address the concerns that parents had as it pertained to how policy would be upheld by the teachers. So it was to empower the teachers to uphold the policy in the eyes of fidelity.
Yes.
I got it, and thank you for explaining that. But what my additional question is after that information is that the concerns of parents are still, and students are still not being acknowledged or addressed, and there are no accommodations so far. I've asked for accommodations. I've been coming to these meetings for a very long time, and I remember when 720 was in place, there was a parent that would come to every meeting, and she spoke about how her student did not have accommodations to be able to use the single-use restrooms, and it was really causing a lot of academic loss for this student. We heard it week after week, and that was never addressed, and she never felt like her student, when 720 was in place, that her student was ever getting their needs addressed, and the academic loss and how far away the student had to go to the bathroom and all of that, how much class time was being missed, and just how difficult the hardship it was on that student. We heard it ongoing. And now it's the other way, that 720 was removed. And if those bathrooms weren't okay for one student, we don't know how they're okay for many students have I've asked in the meetings about accommodations for the students. So I just don't feel like it's being addressed through an AR, through a policy, being talked about. I just don't feel like we're talking about all the other things that are attention being given in other areas, like you just mentioned. And it's just always an after the fact. We're talking about, oh, if this happens, there's going to be behavioral consequences. I'm not interested in hearing who's going to get in trouble and what the penalty is going to be. I'm interested in the concern of it even happening. I want prevention. And I want to know how all of these students who don't feel comfortable and are being forced to just suck it up and use the bathrooms right now.
Mrs. Rudolph, I got your point, and you've reiterated it several times. So
I
in
know,
response-
but I'm doing that because I have to, because I've been coming here and it's not being addressed.
I appreciate that. So this
Yeah.
is a policy committee meeting, so that's where we're going to work through all of this now.
But it's just let go all this time, so that's why I'm bringing it up.
let go all of this time, and the other parent that you mentioned,
Yeah.
those issues were heard, and 720 was retired. So I think that parent,
Okay, well then I'm that new parent.
okay, fair enough. And so Dr.
Okay,
Russell,
I'll come
since
week after
720
week
has
and
been retired,
till it gets addressed.
720 has been retired. Have there been any incidents
No,
reports?
no. We're not going with that. We're not. What? No. Okay. That is not. I'm not going to accept that as a measurement. If Dr. Russell has heard anything, because the principal of the schools and everybody, we've already acknowledged that the students aren't going to anybody. So the students may be going to their parents, but we're not going to dismiss it as a concern just because Dr. Russell and the principal and certain administrative personnel have not heard of it.
What would be your recommendation for addressing it if we can't go that route?
I am not, I don't get paid the big bucks or don't get elected to any position. I'm just a mom who wants to know what is going to be done for these students and to alleviate parents' concerns. I want to have it be addressed, and it's not being addressed. It's just being kicked, the can is being kicked down the road.
So unless a student says something, how could it be addressed?
And how do we know it's a concern?
Well, you had 600 students do a walkout, and then we just completely dismissed it and said they didn't know what they were doing. And they were just trying to get out of class. So I don't know. The first step would be to acknowledge that there's a concern. So that's step one, acknowledging that there's a concern.
Rudolph,
Yeah.
I acknowledge you have a concern. You've articulated it very clearly, repeatedly. I don't know if there are
And
600
I've been, and here we are.
And if there are concerns that need to be brought to the attention of the administration, then they need to be brought forward to the administration. You have brought a concern to our attention. Our administration here, myself, we are not aware. We disagree on
Okay.
how to operate, but we are not aware of concerns on the part of, you just mentioned 600
Oh.
students.
Okay, so are you saying that you are completely unaware that parents and students at this moment have any concerns about these policies? Are you saying that you do not acknowledge any concern on behalf of parents or students about these policies, despite all these meetings with people, public speaking, letters, email, social media, and you're going to say, nope, they all went away and there aren't any except for Mrs. Rudolph?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying we are trying to make an effort to address some of the concerns through some of the language. What I am saying is students have not come forward to the administration with concerns about
And they
bathroom
won't,
use.
because you've had the student ambassador tell you that they can't speak up because they have to face repercussions. And they don't speak up, and they won't. They've tried, and they got punished for attending a walkout. We're not even going to go there. They can't speak up, and neither can their parents.
Want to add into
Microphone, Mrs. Sheridan.
I just have a question. This whole transgender policy, this whole scenario that we've gone through for 2 years, do you not see reverse, I don't know the word I'm looking for. There's a reverse, I had it in my head, I'm sorry, but I don't like talking in public. prejudice, or they're being treated, the transgenders are being treated over. Their needs or their desires or their wants are being taken into consideration more than the biologically male and female children. They are, I mean, I've heard people come up and say that transgenders girls are girls. They're not. There are two sexes. Gender is a different issue. But I just feel that there's reverse discrimination, and I'd like to know how that, I think, it ties in with what she was saying, in that, well, if the transgenders can use the girls' room, and our girls, if they feel uncomfortable, have to use some bathroom on the third floor, that's reverse.
Noted, Mrs. Sheridan. Mr. Jagger, do you have something?
I just wanted to add in kind of how Mrs. Rudolph was talking about students not feeling, safe to come forward and say something. I've personally heard from teachers that they don't even feel comfortable coming forward and saying stuff. And they personally told me that they thanked me for pushing for Policy 720 for the students, but they're afraid to come forward due to repercussions. And I also wanted to touch on the protected class. I keep hearing protected class, but we're not protecting how many classes. You Google it, transgender is not one of the 7 federally protected classes. So how they're in here under a protected class and getting more attention and more privileges than the rest of the protected classes is.
So to speak to the point about transgender being identified as protected class in Perkins Valley's Policy 103, the year, I think it was 18 or 19, Policy 103 was reviewed. It was suggested and adopted that transgender identification be accepted as part of the definition of protected class, and it was voted on unanimously by the board at that time. So that's the reason that this Policy 103 reflects that language. So the board has the prerogative to make policy and have it reflect what is in the best interests of the community. And so at the time that addition was made, it was part of the review cycle.
Yes.
That language
Or there was a
the
P&L.
language was introduced and it was discussed. I don't even really think it was discussed at length. I think it was a pretty.
It's 4 months. It went over. I wasn't on the board, but I looked
It was
back.
prior to that, but it was unanimous. It was unanimously accepted as
Yes.
an adoption of the language. Right. Correct.
Yeah, but I just want to clarify. The Policy 103, I'm just disagreeing with the fact it doesn't make him a protected class. It doesn't mention the term protected class in Policy 103.
It puts it as part of the
Discrimination. Yeah. Correct. Yeah. At that time, there were two different policies merged together to join Policy 103. That process was 4 months.
Also, if I remember, Mr. Dord mentioned at some of the meetings that I've been to that they did not realize that Policy 103 was going to, extend to bathrooms and locker rooms and everything
and
else.
that was Mr. Doerr's prerogative, I suppose, in like a Monday morning quarterback. But I was part of all of those meetings, and he never brought up that concern or question.
So let's take a step back. This is why I think these conversations in our setup can sometimes get hamstrung because we have work to do, like on policies tonight. I wanted Policy 720. That's why I brought it up. But Policy 720 was not voted by the board. It was retired from the board. There is nothing that anyone can do except now try to make sure that we have the best policies and have the best types of safety mechanisms in place that we run a quality school district. Okay? We have to understand that there are parents and teachers and students who have concerns, wonderings, and worries. But I've lived in this area for a long time. I saw what happened during COVID. That's how I got elected. There was massive concerns. I remember when they were talking about doing furloughs for teachers and even cutbacks in teachers, this library was filled to the brim, out the door, lines at board meetings. The board, I can't speak for every board member, the board did not see from the community in person at board meetings a large upheaval. It just never happened to keep policy 720 in place. The board didn't see it. Okay, and that's just a factual information. When I tell you that during COVID there were hundreds of people that showed up to meetings, there were hundreds of people that meetings went till 1 o'clock in the morning, even on Zoom, because 85 people came to speak. Okay, correct. Some meetings went till 2 a.m. The community didn't see that. I'm an advocate for 720. I was advocate when Central Bucks passed it. I was advocate when the Facton passed it. I was advocate for it to being here in the school district. But it didn't, it's now gone. And there's nothing anybody could do about it except help facilitate to make sure that when we create policies, that those policies are done in a way that make sure they check all the dots and cross all the T's. That is important to do. I mentioned it prior to a meeting, Ms. White, I don't know if you were, I think Dr. Russell was the meeting that you were away in policy 103. And look, Wade, you and I are new together on the board, but I do not like, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't like, I use the word rushed or pushed through. I don't like when policies mean something, but they don't say it. For an example, policy 103, when it was added under the authority that happened during the conversations, you brought it up at a policy meeting, it went back to the policy committee, it was not added under the definition side. That's not a critique, that just means there was a mistake with that. So in policy 103, at the top, it mentions that gender identification is in the authority, but when it talks about discrimination, it forgets to mention that. That wasn't purposely done, it was mistakenly done. That's why I say things are rushed through without reading them and understanding what they're going to mean to the school district, not just today, tomorrow. When I mean tomorrow, I don't mean tomorrow, I mean 6 years from now when the school board comes back and says, oh, they did this 6 years ago, they didn't know what it meant. Well, that's because we didn't talk about what we were doing, what we were meaning. So, you know, there's an easy fix on policy 103 because in policy 103,
Talking about policy, not the AR.
not the AR, in policy 103 at the top, it mentions gender identification, and then when you get down to the definitions of the policy, and it talks about discrimination, it forgets to mention gender identification. Correct. And that's what I said. I agree, but that's why I said at the board meeting, and I say again today, when we use policy 103 and saying it's policy 103, it's discrimination, policy 103 specifically says it's not discrimination because what policy 103 defines as discrimination leaves out gender identification. I am suggesting if this board believes that it is discrimination, and in the authority, which is just like a pretext of like, you know, I write a book, but I ask you to write a cover for the book. It's not really the book. If you really want it to be discrimination, you put it in the discrimination section where it's currently missing. No, it's not a critique of anybody. It's just, I've been saying for 2 years, you can't use policy 103. It's not in there. Because it's not. So if you want it to be in there, you put it in there. If you don't want it to be in there, then you don't. You can do whatever you want. That's the board's job. That's our job here. Our job is to do that. It doesn't even have to be up for review. You could just put it in there now and the board votes on it at the next board meeting. You don't have to wait for a policy to be in the review cycle. It's up to the board president and superintendent or even the board as a whole to say, we want this reviewed because this needs to be added.
Right, and so the reason that 103 is not on the agenda for this evening is because we hadn't really been focusing on the language about 103. I think we had moved past that to address the AR, which addressing the AR was really more of a transparency, attempted transparency, as opposed to wordsmithing it as a board committee. So
But to shorten this up, would we agree that we're going to remove the AR and create, maybe not now, but create a policy to what Dr. Weston was talking about? Or
Well, I still think the AR is necessary though, because I think that if there are not, if there are teachers responsible for enforcing policy 103, they need to know what they need to do should there be attached to 103. And this is what I said during the meeting where you were saying, well, the teachers don't know what to do. That's not what I meant.
Yeah.
What I meant was there was no AR codified in board docs other than the attachment with the
hazing.
with the
Reporting form.
with the reporting form. That's correct. So as a teacher, if I'm a substitute and, you know, or I see something happen and I go into 103, if that's where my advisor tells me to, you know, go, and all I'm seeing is a reporting form, that doesn't tell me the steps that I need to take within the building if I'm not familiar with the protocol.
I'd like to know why the teachers are involved in this. Why are the teachers having to be the police for this? Like, why can you? I missed that about why we've appointed teachers to have to take responsibility for this nightmare. I want the teachers to be able to do their job and not have to have this additional burden of figuring all of this out and being responsible for this mess.
Thing is that a teacher official A is a mandated reporter. The second part is B, if there is a discrimination in the classroom
Any kind.
of any kind, it is the teacher's job to either call Mr. Moran or call their house principal, whether it is to notate what that discrimination is, and then have those forms functionally filled out. That's part of the teacher's job.
Carry out policy in order to ensure police state.
But we've been told that the teachers are now going to be responsible for
Responsible with
having bathroom duty.
No, they haven't been- that's not true.
No,
Dr.
that is
Campley-
true though.
Not
The,
true.
the
Just
teachers
because
are
you put it
being
on
told that
it doesn't make it true.
the teachers are being told that they have to monitor the bathrooms, and it was discussed in the meeting that they're going to have to be doing this.
Not been told that. They have not been told that. Dr. Campley stated, in her opinion, an idea that she might have would be to task the teachers to do X, Y, and Z. Okay? That does not mean that that's what the teachers have been told to do. The school board does not tell teachers what to do at all.
Well, I hope not. I hope that the teachers are not going to be involved in this, but now we're hearing about the teachers and in regard to what the teachers are supposed to do, and there's a lot of conversation about teachers, so.
Have always, go ahead, Doctor. What,
I-
you're in charge.
I-
You're in charge of them.
yeah,
So their
I-
responsibility is what?
Their responsibility is to make sure policy is upheld, and if students make poor choices or violate policy, they are held accountable.
Any policy for any reason.
Policy, any infraction that violates a policy, any rule, they are held accountable.
And with that, would
Oftentimes
you like to
teachers-
move on to vaping?
I
after?
would.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. All right, 222. Tobacco products and vaping.
And so, for me, there, you know, again, as we think about some of the local conversations we're having as a board, vaping has come up, and in response to that, I just wanted to bring the policy before the committee around tobacco and vaping products, as well as search and our liberties when it comes to searching students for review by the committee. So it's 222 and 226. There are no recommended revisions on the part of administration, but again, an opportunity to review how the district holds students accountable for tobacco and vaping products, as well as its authority to search a student, so that we're all aware.
Does anyone have any thoughts? Dr. Weston, I know you
Just,
emailed them.
just for clarification, a vaping product does not necessarily have to contain nicotine in
That's
order
as
to
I
be considered
understood.
in order to be prohibited under this policy.
That's as I understood it in our previous conversation.
That's how I understand from reading this policy, but I just want to.
Nicotine, and then any type of juice subject that goes into it. So it's basically the device. Yeah.
Yeah, honestly, just from me reading it, like my point of view, like it specifically mentioned like a lot about tobacco and nicotine and even marijuana. But I mean, somebody could try and I guess twist it around to be like, oh well, this doesn't have any of that in it, so I'm allowed it. So I think maybe it just needs to be a little clearer.
vaping was added
No, it's a nicotine delivery system. That's what the policy talks about, the NDS. Yeah, any type of NDS delivery system. And that's the,
Whether or not there's actually nicotine present, the device or anything associated with the device is prohibited, or the use of the device. That's how I read this, but there's
Right, and I think it's a good, under definitions, point number 2 says, any electronic device that delivers nicotine or another substance to a person inhaling from that device, including but not limited to electronic nicotine delivery systems, an electronic cigarette, a cigar, a pipe, and a hookah.
That would be so awkward to carry around in high school.
But I mean, so the beginning of the statement actually generalizes and takes us away from just nicotine by stating or another substance. Now, we could maybe add some strength to the end of the sentence by saying, or other products on the market currently, something like that, because they keep changing.
any other substance.
Covers it, yeah, okay. Right. That's correct, yeah.
Mr. Jagger, would you feel like it would be more clear if it said any vape device? Yeah.
Because just with the wording there,
By
like
itself is
people
what's
might be like,
prohibited.
oh, this is just straight nicotine, and this stuff is not anything. Where, yeah, yeah.
That in number 2, are you thinking?
I would say any number 2, any electronic device delivery system. I don't know. I guess you would maybe strike nicotine or other substance. So any electronic device that delivers, that allows a person to inhale.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Okay, let me play with it.
because the
And
device
then
itself is what's prohibited.
I'll play with it, and then it'll appear for, if the committee agrees, it'll appear for first reading, and then the board can talk about it further, or there can be comment about it.
Now, do you want
well, yeah, I have more questions about the policy.
Yeah, I was
Okay.
going to say, do you want to talk, I don't know if this is what you were going to say, Mr. Saylor, about search at all, or the authority?
Well, I want to understand, the term tobacco product does not include the following: a product that has been approved by the FDA for the sale of tobacco cessation product or for other therapeutic purposes, where the product is marketed and sold solely for the approved purpose. So, there are products out there that are approved by the FDA. You still can't have them in our school district. Not just that's not a vape. There are smokeless patches that you can put in your gum.
I'm assuming that's what that refers to as patches and gum. Well, then it says
No,
governed by board policy. on
Dr.
medication.
Weston, there's a new product out there that you put underneath your lip. It's like a little white packet. No, snooze is different. Snooze is a smokeless chewing tobacco. This is a. It looks like a little pillow, but it's nicotine. Yeah, they have little mint. Like this whole section.
It's obsolete.
This
Talking about medications, are there circumstances where it might be justified if you're considering it as a medication? I don't know.
So if a student has a legal marijuana card, are we gonna let them smoke in school?
It says they can't in number 2. It says they.
And but that was written before it was legal to have those medical marijuana.
Well, that wouldn't cover that anyway with tobacco. Well,
Could
and
they?
then
Yeah. Could. So yeah.
paragraph 2 says device included on the if sold by a dispensary licensed compliance with the Medical Marijuana Act. That exception is governed by the policy on controlled substances and paraphernalia. So there's cross-referencing that deals with, I think, what your concerns that you're expressing.
What would the edible fall under?
I think,
I was gonna say that, so
I think
two
that-
twenty-two is tobacco and vaping products only, so there has to be another substance. I don't know the number off my top of my head, but is there
Yeah.
another substance policy?
Yep.
Cause that would fall, I mean, I would assume edibles would fall under that policy.
Yeah, but so this policy was last revised in 2020. Way more stuff out there, and I'm going to assume that this next policy is probably same thing 4 or 5 years ago. Yeah. Yes.
volatile solvents or inhalants.
Okay. Right, so substances that when ingested, so that would be edibles, cause a physiological effect similar to the effect of controlled substance. So that's where edibles would fall under, if I had to pick a number.
227.
227.
So I wonder if the committee feels as if we should cross-reference more carefully 222 with 227.
I agree. I agree with that.
And generalize a little bit more. Here's an example of where it's helpful to have policy be a bit more vague, but still uphold the rules, state and federal laws. And so how about if administration looks at these two and brings them back next meeting? Would that be helpful?
I still have a question about. I'm just curious why it mentions students with disabilities and what that's referring to in that aspect of it, and then it does not mention repercussions at all.
So where are you with students with disabilities?
All the way at the bottom.
So when a student is identified with a disability, depending upon how many days of, for example, suspension they have served, under the law, the district is obligated to hold a manifestation hearing once they hit 10 days or leading up to 10 days. So there are rules that are different for students identified with disabilities that must be considered in that regard. It doesn't mean they don't face consequences, but there are different considerations that must be made because they have an IEP.
And that's with all behavioral concerns, not just with regard to this one.
Any student with an IEP, if they make a series of poor choices and face days of in-school suspension or suspension out of school, once they approach 10, the district is obligated to hold a manifestation hearing to determine whether or not the choices are as a result of the disability or
But
not.
why do we have that in this policy?
I don't know, actually. Probably because it was in there to call attention to the fact that students with disabilities need to be thought of differently, and there are some different considerations that must be made when they make infractions,
Yeah, but,
when they conduct infractions.
but where I get confused is the policy doesn't talk about what the penalty is at all.
You're right, it doesn't.
And then there's this, and it just seems out of place.
Yeah, it's not flowing.
Talks about policy 805. That's it. Talks about discrimination, like policy 1031. Like, so I want to be really clear. I don't really care.
I mean,
Yeah.
what do you mean?
We don't want people smoking or vaping in our school district. I'm struggling to understand how we would need to consider how why we should consider policy 103, because it calls out policy 103 in this policy for vaping and product and smoking. Like, I'm just curious, like, discrimination policy is referenced in this. It doesn't make any sense.
Where
Why?
is that referenced?
Go back, it's students with disabilities, and then it gives you the breakdown of why that's in there, and it mentions policy 103.
103.1.
Yeah, why?
Okay, that's 103.1 is non-discrimination for qualified students with disabilities. It addresses specifically students that are identified with a disability. That's why it's referenced. If they're responsible for an infraction, the way that discipline is approached with them needs to be considered differently. There are special considerations
law.
under the law.
Correct. Yeah, but
you
we
know.
don't talk about infractions at all in the policy.
Other than there are things that are not permitted. I think the purpose of the statement is to remind individuals reading it that if a student with a disability commits an infraction aligned in or stated in this policy, you need to think about when you're doling out consequences. I think that's its purpose.
That if the behavior was a result of their disability.
Right, you have to consider a manifestation hearing if they have accumulated some number of days. I'm thinking that's why it's in there. No,
They have to have a documented IEP.
they have to have that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, they don't have different consequences. But if they commit enough infractions to accumulate days of suspension leading up to 10 or hitting 10 under the law, we now have to have a manifestation hearing to determine whether or not their choices are as a result of their disability. And if so, then we need to think differently about how we're supporting the student. But they get the consequences. We just have to, that's a threshold that we have to be aware of under the law. Because if a student, exactly, yeah. It's just, if a student has a disability, you need to take that into consideration when they're making poor choices over and over. And that's the purpose of that manifestation hearing. But it doesn't mean they don't face consequences.
Are you referring to policy 204? But 204 is about the days of absences from school to missing school for having too many days off, and trying to determine if there's a disability and they need an IEP or 504. I have it here. Actually, I had a question about 204. That's why I know a little bit about it.
Yeah,
So can we go back to authority real quick?
But I think it's referring to that.
I don't know if it says nicotine twice. Word prohibits possession, use, purchase, or sale of tobacco and vaping products, including the product marked as a Juul. I don't even know if a Juul's still around anymore, if that's still a product. So we might want to either take that out, and I don't, e-cigarettes. I don't really, I think we should update the language. Yeah, regardless of whether such products contain nicotine and nicotine. I don't know what that was originally supposed to mean, but it's the same. It's the same word. Buyer students at any time in the school building or on school buses or other vehicles that are owned, leased, controlled, blah, 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 by the school district.
I was thinking maybe I would reach out to PSBA to see if they have an updated policy with updated language. I don't disagree. I think we need to be a little bit more forward-thinking with the language. So, as I mentioned, what I would recommend to the committee is that administration looks at 222 and 227 and considers updated language and brings them back to the next policy committee meeting, and we can talk through those. I think these are valid points that we need to look at and consider updating.
Would the board's medication policy ever allow a student to use medical marijuana?
Policy 222 says no.
10.2. That's what this policy is referencing.
That's medications. Does it call out medical marijuana?
Item 2 at the top of when we're talking about tobacco products, item 2 under there says guidance issued by PA Department of Health directs schools to prohibit possession of any form of medical marijuana by students at any time on school property or during any school activities on school property.
Right. And so what I want to check on though, Mr. Saylor, is that it's been a while, I think, since we looked at this, 2020. So I want to make sure that that still holds under the law. So I'll check into that.
Ready to move on to 226 search?
So 222 and
Or you-
227 will come back.
And I would like the policy, Ms. White, to have more teeth when it comes to a student who violates this policy. Yeah. A student who violates this policy shall be subject to teeth.
Okay.
But it doesn't mention it. Right now, it just says subject to persecution initiated by the district. But what is it?
Okay.
Like, can we create through policy? Would you be okay if the board, through a specific policy on vaping, had a tiered system for first, second, tertiary offenses?
That's stipulated already
It
in
is.
the handbook
So I want to show you that. It is.
with the 1, 2, 3 part of it. My feeling about the infraction numbers is the, and I've mentioned, is the tracking part of it,
Right. Mm-hmm.
because I feel as though
Handbook's not policy, though. Handbook is not policy.
understood.
Yeah.
The handbook in response to drug and alcohol
Can you take the
infractions.
mic with you if you're gonna talk?
These are the administrative guidelines. And so this is where policy affords administration the liberty to identify the infractions for specific offenses. Go to the code of conduct. Level 2 represents vaping, use of tobacco, vape, etc. So it's referenced here as well. And the consequences in the event a student has a first offense, second, third, or fourth offense.
If they just have it.
Possession is citable. Possession, right here. And it references board policy 222.
Okay.
So I think, it would be helpful to hear from the committee some of your thoughts around the consequences that would modify the behaviors. That's the purpose of consequences. When students commit infractions, they are assigned consequences. And the goal of those consequences is to modify behaviors. If we need to think about some of these, we can talk through that.
I guess the question would be: is the reporting indicative to? Is the reporting too safe to say indicative to the stories that we're hearing in the community? Because when we catch a student with a vape pen, it gets reported once a year, right? So, yes,
In
it
this-
says in the policy.
You mean the Safe Schools report?
Safe Schools report. Yeah,
that's
sorry.
that's
Yeah.
a big difference.
So,
yeah.
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 I apologize.
I
So,
know.
how many vaping incidences are we reporting? And if that number is small, which I think it is, then so that means you could have all this, you could have all the words in a policy and in a handbook. If they're not catching it, it doesn't matter. And I don't think because the school board gets that report, it's presented to us by Mr. Miller. Oh no, that's a safe to say report. It's presented to us in that other presentation. I don't think it's a large number.
Clarify some of the language. Mr. Miller presents a safety report at the end of the year within which he includes safe to say reporting, that's anonymous reporting to the state. He also tends to include data that will go to the state as part of our Safe Schools report. And that's verified, or that's populated through our student information system, because consequences go, or infractions go in the student information system. And then if it's an infraction that rises to the level of involving police, we also must submit with that Safe Schools report 3 memorandums of understanding by the 3 police agencies connected to our district. Collegeville isn't technically connected, but they still sign off. And they have to say, yes, we are not aware of Perkiomen Valley students having weapons in school, or yes, we were aware of one incident as reported, etc. So there is a check and balance in place.
I just don't think that number. Ms. White doesn't remember either. I don't think that number popped out at any.
Wasn't a red flag number, right? So I guess that goes back to my question about the enforcement of the accountability and whether or not it's being reported. In other words, what are teachers doing to report? Like, what mechanism do they have? They would
Yeah.
have to.
Am I hearing this right? There are incidents happening and administration is not aware of them?
I'm not sure anyone said that. I'm not sure.
Okay. So administration is claiming to be aware of when all these incidents are happening and the numbers that we have are accurate, are believed to be accurate accounts.
Patient is not claiming that. No.
We're asking is we have all been told and heard stories about vaping.
Mhm.
I think what Ms. White and I and Laura, speaking for you, say, Jason, that's not right. What we're trying to quantify is, are the students doing this and not getting caught? And if that's the case, how do we better catch the students? Because from what I recall, from what Ms. White's recall, the number, when it was reported to us, didn't pop out to a number that, it was a number that was like normal. Yeah, that number makes sense. 65, sure, that makes sense. But I think the number should be larger. And I think what
20, and how many of the 120 are the same 5 students, or and what are those students doing to correct the behavior? What consequence were they given in order to rectify the situation? So I guess in my mind, the tie-in for me behaviorally is the AR piece, just like you had said in a conversation about Title IX infractions. Okay, so this is really the same as that in the sense that without accountability, how are we addressing the issue? So would it be a marching order AR associated with 222 to allow teachers to codify the expectation of this is how we're tracking this from now on?
Like, do you ever think, as an example, this happens, a security guard, or SPO, or teacher sees a kid with a vape and just says, put that away, I don't want to see that? Or do they say, gotcha, come with me,
Write it up
3-day
formally.
ISS into the system? Is it more, hey, I don't want to see that again, knock it off? Or is it, is the execution of the arrangement 0 tolerance? Or is it, hey, put that away, don't let me ever catch you back with that again?
Paired with the 0 tolerance, the actual documentation of it.
I think the
Right.
documentation, anytime a kid gets an ISS or a detention, it has to
That's
be,
reported.
Yeah,
all
right.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think that's a fair question, and I don't know the answer to it without asking more questions of security, of our school police officers, and of our administration. And, I wrote down, how do we most effectively catch students vaping? Because the impression is there's a lot of students vaping. I don't know what the real number is, but I can ask that question. Do people vape, or is every student that's caught with
Every
a vape
time.
held accountable every time and face the consequences in the handbook? I can find out.
I would say the data doesn't match what we're hearing from students who have
Impression,
come to
yeah.
me, right? Uh,
Cameras in the restroom.
Against the law, you can't do that.
I know, but I'm being facetious,
Oh, yeah.
but that's how you get, unless you actually see the students in the restrooms where we believe this is happening.
Still not real clear on where we have cameras in the school. Do we have cameras that see people going in and out of the restrooms? Yes. Okay. Do we have vape detectors in the restrooms? One.
Did a
Has-
trial run last year, Dr. Wesson. I think there was a company, and we did a trial run where we got one vape detector. Yeah.
I remember talking about this when I was on the board before, and I think we were generally skeptical of how useful those would be. And I'm curious if you have a bathroom with the vape detector. Have you gotten any useful information from it? Is it obvious that it's there and kids just, it's like, don't vape in there. There's the vape detector. Yeah, that's, I was,
Ash-
it took me a while to figure out what actually they were doing. I was trying to visualize, and it was challenging. But
You know if it's even in the high school?
Yeah, Mr. Ganesh is planning to report out at the Safety and Ops meeting this week, Thursday night, on these vape sensors and the cameras that sort of pair with them. They send a message to administration when they detect the vape in the bathroom, and administration has to go up there and then see if they can.
Match the camera.
I don't know. It's an idea. I think that's a safety and ops conversation, but
That be presented to the full board?
yeah, absolutely.
For,
yeah.
for discussion during the board
No,
meeting?
no, just whatever the data is, can that be presented to the
Oh,
full
I think
board?
it should.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll see what Mr. Ganesh is planning to share Thursday night, and absolutely, I can put it in the memo and we can talk about it in public. Absolutely, yeah.
There be the possibility for like the school resource officers, like I don't know how they work. Like I assume they do rounds, like, and at the last meeting it was said that the third floor was a big problem. Would they be able to during the rounds just pop open the bathroom door? I don't think there's any female officers, so I don't know if they'd be able to pop into the female restrooms, but
There aren't multiple SROs here at the high school. So
No,
just,
yeah.
they're in individual buildings.
Yeah, every school's 1-to-1, so it doesn't matter if it was male or female, because you would have one male. You wouldn't have any male officers in some school. It's not like we have two. But yeah, they could pop. You could pop open the smell. I mean, they already do that now. I know security guards do that, and I know teachers that do that because I hear from students that they do that. Like they were just walking by, they kick the door open to see if not kick the door, but they push the door open to see if there's anything coming out. Problem with vape is the smoke like dissipates much quicker than a cigarette. It's there and gone. So you could vape in a bathroom if it's a large enough bathroom, one of the larger, not a single stall. That smell is gone within probably 15 to 20 seconds. And the detection of smoke and seeing smoke is gone literally within seconds. It just doesn't stay long. Like a cigarette lingers for a long. You can probably tell a cigarette an hour later somebody was smoking in there. A vape, it's gone quick. It smells like Fruity Pebbles for 20 seconds, and then it's just out the door. It's gone.
How do we find the devices instead of policing the bathrooms? Like that to me is a bigger, because if you're remove the device, you can't have the action, right? So if it's going to be so hard to,
I think you do that by having severe consequences for when the device is found.
yeah, right.
And I'm not talking expulsion. I'm just talking severe consequences when the device is found, and not having a differential. Like we have a differential for possession and use. Well, if you possess it, you're using it. Otherwise, there's no reason to possess it. So
During school hours, correct.
no, I'm talking about. Well, I'm talking about in general. We have a differential between possession and use. It should be the same. You possess
Same consequence.
the same consequence,
I
whether
would
you
agree with
possess it or whether you use it. I don't care if it's empty or if it's filled. It doesn't matter. It's the consequence is there. And note some of them come as erasers, as pens. They look like magic markers. It's a very hard item to tackle because the devices are hidden in scope, and as it's used, the smell of it goes away really, really quickly. And I would assume I would have to know from Karthik, but if I vaped right now into the microphone, by the time it senses it, pings it, sends it to the administration, they head back down to the bathroom, that person's gone. Well, now they got to go, okay, it's 12:15, floor 2, this is where I am. Now I got to go check the camera, right, to find out who the student is. Maybe they do that, but then do we say, okay, that was John Doe? Are they now saying, all right, let's pull John Doe from class and give him that 3-day ISS? Or is it just, hey, we know that John Doe did it? Yeah.
Not just possession and it's not just use, but possession is also an infraction that students can be held accountable for.
That's for drug or alcohol. But if you go down to vaping, it looked like, and I could be wrong, I'm sorry, I thought there was for vaping, it was possession and then for usage.
Dr. Russell, I remember it being recently, when did we last um, review the handbook? Was it last year or?
Every year.
Every
Yeah.
summer?
Yeah.
Okay, so, and do we have to wait or can we start it?
The process has already begun.
Okay.
So Ms. Widener sort of organizes that and provides the drafts. She kind of keeps a master copy, and then principals and buildings start to input where we know we need changes.
Right.
Uh,
For every grade, for
Yeah,
every level.
And this is something that I'd like to bring to the attention of our secondary administrators
Right.
and see if we want to review and rethink. Again, the idea that we might want to think about getting stricter with consequences
Yeah.
to more effectively modify the behaviors is a reasonable suggestion.
Well, and I
I'd like
think
to
that's
talk
where
that's
a
where
lot
it's-
of the tie-in for multiple things come into play, is if it's all guiding back to the handbook, but the handbook is not doing what it needs to do.
There it is right there. If I smoke my vape, it's 3 days ISS, 3 days suspension. 3 days suspension. I don't know if that's ISS or OSS.
ISS.
ISS. But if I just possess my vape, it's just, a 2 office detentions. Now, I also had a question. When getting back to the policy where it says it's disposed of, the policy mentions disposal. Yeah. Are we now, so, yeah, so gym teacher catches vape pen from student while running in class. He picks it up and says, hey, that's 3 days ISS. Is he just taking the vape pen and throwing it away, or is he going to give it now to our chief of police so the chief of police can run tests on it to see what's actually in it? Because this just says the board authorizes a confiscation and disposal of products. Who's doing that? That's now that we have a chief of police, it should, everything should be given to the chief of police to do their due diligence of what's in that product.
Happens currently here at the high school, because that's where the most infractions occur, is that Mr. Haran houses these products. So if a teacher at times, if a teacher would confiscate this item, what he or she should do is report it to administration, and then administration confiscates this item. How they dispose of them, I'm not sure. I would need to ask about that. But they confiscate
And what
them.
analysis
they take
happens.
Them, right. They take them. And if there's a suspicion of marijuana, they have a test that they run. And they can tell if there's marijuana in
So
that.
like a litmus.
That-
I would
yeah,
love
that's a
I would
different-
love to get Dean involved, because I would hate to have a teacher, and this has happened not at Perkins Valley, but sometimes there are substances on these devices, and a skin contact to it can cause a massive allergic reaction and have issues. You have had officers have run into issues. You've had teachers throughout the country. Like, is there a policy? They're putting gloves on. They're handing it over to our chief of police, or like, we don't know what's in these products. If there's other things in the product that we don't want someone touching on their skin. Yeah.
When Mr. Miller presents the safety report, we can talk about these things, or be prepared with some of the information that's being requested this evening to be a part of that. If that would be helpful, we'd be happy to do it.
And if you sense that he has a nice collection, then we should see some stronger data sets then.
Well, it's all items that are taken away across the
they're,
board.
yeah.
Do they still
absolutely.
take snap bracelets away? Or?
I don't know. I don't know.
Big controversy in my elementary school on the snap bracelets.
They were deemed illegal at some point when I was in school. Yeah.
I just have one more question, or not really a question. Yeah, I just want to just make this point. I know we can't change how the policy is right now, or an AR. It's what's done is done. But I would like to just point out that we just spent all this time on hypotheticals in regards to drug use in the schools. Hypothetical situations that could happen. We're paying quite a lot of attention to that. But yet, back to the bathroom policies, it's, well, we haven't heard, it's all hypothetical. So, there's just a difference. And I just want to make that point. I know we can't change anything. We can add to it and make it safer. But I feel that the two don't balance out. If that makes sense. And that's, I think a lot of people are observing that.
A lot of time on one topic that's a concern, but not as much time on another topic that's also a concern. Yeah. And all I will add, not to, at the risk of sounding defensive, we have spent a lot of time talking about restrooms up until tonight, and it has been an ongoing conversation. And I don't want you to feel as if that common ground, that middle ground, that we can all work from and keep our kids safe. Uphold rights for all students and keep our kids safe.
There seems to be discrepancy, though, because in one regard we say administration is not aware of a problem and nothing's being brought up, so therefore it just doesn't exist. But in this regard now, with the vaping, we believe that there are these concerns and these things happening, but we're going to look for them. We believe that they exist, even though administration is not being told about them. We're going looking for them to find out, because we believe they do exist. So how can we find them?
I view it through the lens, my perception is that we have an agenda in place where we're talking about the different facets of behavioral challenges and consequences. And so in the instance that you reference, there is no agenda item on the AR 103. That's not a policy that we were revisiting language. We did discuss changes that need to happen to the visitors policy. and also including for future conversation, student rights and responsibilities, 235. But the tie-in to all of it has, again, back to behavior, specific in this instance this month to tobacco and vaping products. And so that's, I think, the difference is that there's
No, I'm sorry, I don't think that I was clear enough. So I'll try again. When we bring up concerns about the co-ed bathrooms, the administration claims that nobody is coming to them. They're not hearing of these concerns. You both just looked at me like I was crazy by mentioning that there are parents and community members, students who are concerned, because it just seems like, well, I don't know who would be concerned about these, co-ed bathrooms. We're not hearing anything, so it just simply doesn't exist. But what you use the measure of, I'm not hearing anything. So you're using that as the way to measure it, whether or not there's a concern. But now when we're talking about vaping, we acknowledge that you're not hearing about it, administration is not hearing about it, but that doesn't mean that there isn't. So we're looking for it because we believe that there are concerns. So they're not being brought to administration, but it's different now because we believe that those things do exist, so we're going to look for them. So we're using it we're measuring the hearing of administration hearing about something. In one regard, there isn't a problem because there's nothing to see here. But in another regard, we're saying, oh, there is a problem. We're just going to have to go find it.
I don't think that's accurate, Mrs. Rudolph, because I think that what we're saying and what the conversation that Mr. Saylor and I have been having with regards to tobacco and vaping is that we are hearing it, but the data doesn't support it.
But you're listening to that and you're going to look for it because you believe that it's inconsistent.
So I have had many students approach me about vaping. I then asked those students to reapproach me about specifics to where the vaping was, so I could address the issue in a more proficient way.
I'm glad it's being addressed. I'm not trying to say that. I'm very glad that you're addressing this. I'm just pointing out the difference.
Know about. The question is, the instances that we know about, is that number a lot smaller than the real issues, and could there be reasonings to why that number is smaller? Meaning, are we not having a zero tolerance with it? And we also know that our tools and techniques don't necessarily capture everything, because you have a 30-second window to capture it, but it affects the other students in the bathroom. When they're seeing it, they're still going about their time doing what they're doing, but then they're like, oh God, I can't believe I was going to the bathroom, someone vaped in there real quick.
I get all that, and I agree with everything that you're doing. I'm just saying that the attention is not given in the other regard, and the measurement system is flawed.
But before, I have not had a lot of kids approach me, students. I have not had any students ever approach me about the bathroom
Have you had parents and community members?
policy, but
Right, to my point. Thank you.
that's gone. So it's like,
Yeah,
But the
if I
concern
could-
isn't gone. The policy's gone.
Part of what, I think it ties in is we feel that our concerns have not been given enough attention. I'm going to say it as it is. The group that, quote, won, the transgender group that won, I was at a meeting one time, and a minister got up and he spoke, and one of the school board members, a parent got up and said, don't bring your Jesus here, and one of the school board members agreed. And yet then we come to a meeting here and we have a Satan priest who brings in his girls, and they get up and they speak. Now, since the 720 was rescinded, they haven't been here at all. because it's over. It's done for them. But our concerns still haven't been addressed.
So it's not a contention. My observation to that would be, should you have behavioral, should you have suggestions for behavioral modifications in order to give more feeling of security to a group of students that is not reporting that they're feeling insecure or unprotected for any reason? I'm not saying that that feeling is not valid. I'm saying that it's not being reported. So is there a mechanism that you would suggest be in place to allow that to happen? Because
Well,
what
but-
we're talking about right now is an agenda full of behavioral expectation items.
But I think that was brought up by many parents where the children came home and said, and I'll say, I even got up and I said, why are we telling girls now that they have to just ignore that discomfort feeling that they have?
About this, but to Dr. Russell's point, and I think Mr. Saylor reiterated this evening, those concerns were heard. How would you request those issues be monitored or behaviorally? Because what we're talking about right now for these agenda items, this policy review, are addressing behavioral issues and consequences. So what consequence, go ahead, Mr. Saylor.
Rob, we live in a world right now where everyone feels as though their opinion matters more than everybody else's opinion, and everyone should be heard. But that's just not like that's
Biology, it's not opinion.
but that's a different conversation. You and I will agree on that aspect, but in the world of policy and regulation, right? Everyone's opinions aren't validated, and I know, Ms. White, you like to use the word. Yeah, I hear you, and I'm validating you, and I get all that. But at the end of the day, when you're on a board like that we're on, it's black and white. There's votes, and I vote yay, and I vote nay, right? And you cannot have, this is not an encompassing world of everyone gets everything, right? It just doesn't work that way. We're not in a financial situation where, for instance, in PV we could have male bathrooms, female bathrooms, transgender bathroom, or whatever you want. Like, this is not the world we live in. In some instances, some people are happy, and in some instances, other people are happy. That's why, if you look at, in our republic that we live in, unless it's 1789, it's a 55-45 world. You're
But
gonna
then I
agree
have
with
one more
55%.
question.
But
I
to that-
disagree with
but to
45%,
that point,
but
Mr.
you have to
Saylor,
move on.
When I say that I hear you, I literally mean I hear the concern, and people's perceptions
Correct.
are valid.
You just don't have to agree with their concern.
That's correct.
That's correct.
And
yeah.
so regardless, just like as we were,
Yeah.
heard the counter argument to that.
And care about it.
Well, I actually wouldn't even say that, because I do truly believe
I
that
cared
when you
about it.
hear
Yeah.
perspectives, I do truly believe that you care about what they have to say and why.
Disagree
But
with it.
you didn't agree with it.
Yeah.
And so you stood up for what you believed with and what you agreed with. And so I think that that's the difference of saying you hear somebody, their personal acknowledgement and truth should be validated regardless of what their opinion is.
Then I have one more question. Is there your incident reports, when something happens in the school, is that available to parents at any given point in time?
So parents are made aware of an infraction committed by their student.
Well, by their student, but the report that you get together of all the different instances or issues that happened at the school.
State website has all that
Yeah,
information.
State schools
it's
report is
public. It's public.
But it's a broad stroke public, like 5%, blah, blah, blah.
For our school.
Yeah.
How would we find out for our school?
So if you access the Pennsylvania Department of Education's website,
Okay.
and you Google or you search Safe Schools Reports, you can get the report for any school in the Commonwealth.
Okay, now do those reports include, for instance, my daughter goes to school and a trans comes in and he, starts waving whatever, which is an infraction, right? Whether it be a boy or a girl, it would be. And she comes home. She doesn't tell you, but she comes home and she says, I was in the bathroom and this person came in and didn't shut the door and was peeing and I was right there.
you then have the opportunity to fill out a form, which is
As a
Is
parent.
that's what the parent has to do?
yeah, well, because somebody has to know about
Okay.
it. You have the opportunity to fill out a form. Once that form is submitted to HR, it is included in the report. I mean, it's not going to say this person's name, but it's going to show that there was an incident at some level.
If
It's
the-
gonna show an incident,
it-
so what would that fall
I-
under?
If
Title
the
IX or-
investigation reveals an infraction, it will be reported and a part of that report. So take a look at the report, and then if you have questions, we can talk through those. Yeah. Yes, there are. Yep. And it's disaggregated by race, by grade, by gender, so you'll see that. Yeah. Okay. So maybe we can move to search. Are there any questions on the search policy?
Hold on,
222
are
and
you comfortable then? 222, I mean.
Yeah, 222 and 227 together will be brought back
Okay.
with proposed revisions and more forward language,
Updated
current
language.
language
That's what I wrote
for
down.
the committee to consider.
Great. Are we
Okay.
good with that, Mr. Saylor, Dr. Weston?
Mr.
Keenan?
Keenan?
Cool. Okay, 226.
Right, search. I have no recommended revisions to this policy.
I think this policy really needs. I mean, was this reviewed? Because the last time this was reviewed was 2019. So vernaculars have changed, techniques have changed. Well, students don't use locker rooms anymore. Not locker rooms. I'm sorry. Lockers anymore. So that instance of the bag and searching their locker is kind of moot. You would have to search their bag. Their bag is in the classroom. Normally, searches don't happen in the classroom.
There are gym lockers that students use. So lockers is still an appropriate and practical term to incorporate.
Especially theoretically, though, Mr. Saylor, if you took that language out, what if they were hiding something in their assigned locker?
No, I understand that. When you do a search, you're going to search the locker and you're going to search. I mean, we were told that students didn't use the gym lockers at all, so you would search that. But the classroom now search is important search because that's where their bags are.
Students who are participating in athletics may use lockers to store things.
I know, but this is about searching. This is about a student search. Correct.
Right, just mentioning that lockers are used in under certain circumstances. So I don't know that I agree with eliminating the terminology around lockers.
I don't want to eliminate it, but it doesn't touch about the classroom.
Okay. So
Now, where the search is most likely going to take place.
I do have some updated information from Mr. Miller that I'll share with the board this week, and then maybe he can take a look at this. And see, he did not review it before tonight, so maybe I'll ask him to do that under current law and make sure it upholds current law.
But do I understand correctly that students are not being searched in the classroom? They're being removed from the classroom and searched separately.
In the office, correct?
Yeah, but if you're talking about having dogs come in for the example, traditionally dogs come in and they roam the hallway for the locker rooms. They would roam the locker room for the locker rooms. They wouldn't walk through classroom. They would not walk through
So
classrooms.
would that be part of this policy, or would that be a separate policy?
I think that
Search would
that,
be this
that could be a
policy,
part of
search
this
is search.
policy. Yeah. Let me ask
But
Mr.
there was
Miller
no-
his thoughts. I didn't do that in advance of tonight, but I'm happy to do that. I think it's a good suggestion.
Dr. Weston, did you, based on your face, did you?
I'm yeah, I'm curious the circumstances under which we would have dogs. I think when we start bringing in dogs, we're getting beyond.
So, in an update that I received from Mr. Miller, he spoke to the Pennsylvania State Police, and they are willing to assist us if we want to bring in drug-sniffing dogs. Due to court rulings on school searches by law, enforcement canines, the search, if utilized, would be limited to common areas and school lockers. Individual students and specific items like backpacks cannot be specifically searched unless they're found in these areas. Canines are not allowed in the classrooms for the purpose of a cursory search, as these areas are protected and not considered common.
So there are ways to solve those problems. You could, yeah, because yeah, that's what I'm saying. So there's twofold, like locker inspections and searches. You know, this is pre-COVID talking points in the policy where we know for the most part lockers are not necessarily being used by students. So Dr. Weston, to your question, we know from a helicopter view as a school board that there might potentially be a vaping issue in the school district. We might know that in the school district. And, you know, because of everything that's involved with the vaping, there's nothing, we have school police, we've already had those conversations. But if you had a one and done opportunity where a police canine would come in and sweep the school, they might find in one run, they might find students that have these products on them, right? That's not necessarily a what was the term that you used? A police state. That is, we know of a problem and we know of solutions, and this is a potential solution that we have in our toolkit to use if we want to. I don't know how that makes it a police state. It then shows the student body that we're serious about a problem that's being reported to the school board members and that the school already knows about, because as we know that, you know, they collect these things, right? There's a way to quickly solve an issue for that day.
And so I guess the point would be, though, in this procedure, those searches are not happening in every single classroom.
They can't. They're not allowed.
Understood.
Yeah.
So then, if we were to implement that mechanism, it would need to be done in a way to still get the information, not allowed to the classroom.
You'd
So
say-
would it be at the front door? Would it be on the bus line?
You could say, hey, you know, at 10 o'clock, we're putting all of our bags outside of our classrooms.
The hallway along the wall?
The hallway is along the wall, and a police dog's gonna come by and do what it does. That's something that we could do.
Right.
We could do it.
Right.
Should we do it? Are we going to do it? It's a discussion point for the board. We know now that they can't go into the classroom, but it is a way.
But it would be similar to a drill, for lack of a better explanation.
Absolutely. You would also
It'd
need
be
the
a safety
students.
drill.
You would need the students to stand outside as well, because they have it on their person. And by the way, this happens at the airport. Why? Well, yeah. Yes, we do. Well,
don't
the students need to be lined up themselves as well, because the dog can't go into the classroom.
So I think if
So
I
would you
could-
be? I'm just.
Go ahead.
Would you be against metal detectors? In theory? So I'm curious, I'm curious, I'm curious how you are trying to quantify reason to,
Active
to
measures.
like, do you want to be, so you're saying unless we have students, unless we catch students with guns or there's a school shooting or there's knifings, we have no reason to have a metal detector. Would that be your would that be your theory? Do not think right now Perkins Valley needs metal detectors. No, but that's not what I asked you. Do you object to metal detectors? And would you only want metal detectors if we needed a reason to have the metal detectors, which would then, by the way, be after the situation happened? But so how many instances of finding a weapon would it take for you to be okay with metal detectors? No, I'm being serious. Is it one or two? Why? I'm just trying to quantify how many students do we need to find vaping? What would be my criteria for Perkins Valley needing metal detectors? Would it be the same criteria that, for instance, George Washington High School used, which is a school that I went to? There were instances where students were bringing weapons into the school and they were being caught, and they found it easier and safer to install metal detectors. So when I was in ninth grade, we had no metal detectors. When I was in 12th grade, we had medical detectors. We have a situation in Perkins Valley where students are vaping, and it's not that easy to catch them. A catch-all would be just like we run a fire drill, to have a drill where we bring in canines to sniff out the drugs and get rid of it all in one shot.
So I think if I can, just briefly, what I feel is the situation, Dr. Weston, based on what your response is, it's a difference in philosophy of the proactive nature of it. So I think, and Mr. Saylor, correct me if I'm wrong, your approach to zero tolerance is zero tolerance. You can't get caught with something if you don't have it. But there's no optically, there is no fear, quote unquote, however you want to say it, for ramifications of the students, because no matter what's been done, it's still happening. The behavior is still occurring. So unless there is some sort of significant acknowledgement of a zero tolerance consequence, I think that Mr. Saylor is recommending the dogs because it literally would solve the problem. If in theory, if students know that there will be sniffing canines and everybody will be lined up military style in the hallway, I realize it creates like a really disturbing image, and that's where you're coming from, and I would agree with that, except for the simple fix of that is then don't bring it to school and do it. It's easy to remedy the situation. Now, with regards to the metal detector situation, for football games where we have a tremendous outpouring from the community and visitor schools, what I wanted was wanding, based on not an incident that happened here, but based on
Phoenixville.
the climate in general.
Okay.
The climate in stadiums in general and the issues that happen in public high school stadiums. And so is there an incident or is that a proactive measure? It seems like it should be common sense that maybe weapons shouldn't be taken, even if you have a permit to carry, into a public school stadium, but apparently it's not for some, and then issues happen. So my solution, zero tolerance, is if people know that we're wanding and that they're not going to be permitted entrance if they're carrying, that would be the consequence. So I view this in the same sort of lens as that, because I think that the kids that are habitual vapors, they're like, okay, so I'll get 3 days ISS and then I'll be done and then I'll just continue doing what I'm doing. So at what point do we take a measure as a school district to stop the behavior for them walking in with it at all? And how do we accomplish that goal of getting them not to bring it to school? And that can be rhetorical, but I don't know. I mean, I think that your delivery, it creates, because you're like, okay, no, zero tolerance, and I agree with the zero tolerance approach, but the image that it conjures is like you're in boot camp and you're lining up outside for a check. That's the image. And you may mean that, yeah, okay, so good. But I think that maybe we can come to a compromise as to the execution piece of it. So is it more casual than, okay, everybody in the hallway, maybe it could be a bus loop walk. Maybe it could be by the front door. The last time I flew home from Orlando, the way that they had everything stanchioned, everybody had to go in pairs through an open corral, and dogs walked back and forth. So, and that's not at every airport, but clearly something happened where that became the mechanism in that instance. So I think that I personally feel like it's reasonable if we were to pursue the dog route, and it's random, and one morning they're back and forth over the bus route as kids are walking in. If you know you can't do it, then don't do it.
Don't forget, everyone that parks in their parking lot, they can sweep that and smell it. Yep.
Same difference. Yeah. So, but again, I don't know that it has to necessarily be like, let's line up in the hallway, hands on the wall. I realize that from an imagery standpoint, that's like. But it is also unacceptable for kids to bring vape products to school. And so, how do we fix it? What are we doing to solve it?
We have an atmosphere in our school district that's unacceptable right now with vaping already. It's unacceptable that students feel as though when they go to the bathroom, someone's going to be in there vaping. That's an unacceptable experience. And so it's at the middle school level and the high school level, so we should figure out ways to do everything and empower then the superintendent to use those tools at their disposal. It's not the school board's job to say, on March 17th, we're going to have the dogs. We're going to develop policies. These are the tools. This is what we find out. And the expectations are, we want to catch more people vaping or dispel the rumor that we have a vaping issue. And by the way, if in the next 3 weeks we catch 150 kids vaping, the school board would I would say, mazel tov, you're doing something really good. We're catching more people. That's what we want. Hopefully it trickles down the line and it stays out of the class.
The idea would not be to catch anybody, because it shouldn't. Then just don't bring it in. You know, it's like people are not. It's like if we had a water bottle issue and people were bringing non-water bottle items in the water bottle. Okay, well, do we outlaw all water bottles because one kid decided to not bring water in the water bottle, or how are we catching that? What's the mechanism? So I'm not against the dogs. I am against the police state. Right. And I think that is a legitimate. That's what we need to talk about. Right. Is to what the consequence should be if that's found, and then how. Mrs. Rudolph, did you have something to add?
I mean, I think that the kids are smart enough to, if they are possessing something, that the dogs can't be everywhere all at once, and they're going to be smart enough to find a way to get rid of whatever they have quickly. Yeah, they would.
I'm not sending an email and say we're having dogs next week.
So what would that look like?
Like you come to school, and as you're walking through the school building, there could be a dog there.
So then don't do
But
something that will put you in trouble potentially.
I know, but they're smarter than that. They're smart to get around that. They're gonna ditch it. They're gonna.
Their head in the toilet and blowing.
So would but then the
But they're getting away with it.
then the converse of that would just then be we do nothing.
And then,
Would
by
be
the way,
what?
if they just dumped it as they were walking in,
Yeah.
it would be found.
But I know. But are you gonna fingerprint them? How are you gonna know?
Dumped
You're just gonna. They're gonna find places to dispose of them. Trash cans.
as they're walking into the school. That's great.
Yeah.
And then they're disposed of, and they won't be in the school anymore.
But then it looks like I know. But then it looks like, oh, nobody. Okay, never mind. Do whatever. I'm just.
Look,
Never mind.
I see. I'm walking to that window right there, and I see there's a dog. I take my vape and I throw it on the ground. The dog that's checking the parking lot's gonna smell the vape. It'll be picked up and thrown away.
It'll
One
be
less-
just like the detectors. Too late.
less vape.
I think in Mr. Saylor's view, it would be mission accomplished,
Yeah.
because now it's not coming into the building. It's
Correct.
now a non-issue for that day, and now that student,
Has to
it
buy
doesn't
another one.
prevent that student from vaping, but it prevents that student from bringing a vape here. Is that
I
is that your
appreciate
point?
the effort. I'm just saying kids are gonna find a way around it.
I would be in full agreement. Everybody out of the classroom, stand in the hallway there, and run the dog. I mean,
Well, I think there's more than one way to get it done, though. Right.
crap, I should not bring this to school. I'm getting in trouble now.
Correct.
That should be self-explanatory, but again,
It's almost like they need a smack
Right.
in the face.
okay.
Throw that vape to the other person and they put it in their pocket, it's theirs. The law says that. It says 9/10 of the law. Well, then, public notice. Any parent, if another kid throws a vape pen to your kid, tell them not to catch it.
Or when your kid says it's not mine, think twice about that.
And I'm all about teaching kids how to catch. In this instance, drop it.
All right, so with Mr. Miller, we're going to explore some more of the nuance of the
Yes,
search, and we
yes.
will present it. Mr. Saylor, what would your recommendation be? Would you like it to come back to the policy committee next month, or would you like it to come to the board as a whole this April? Or both?
I think so. I think the search is on here because you and
Yeah.
and Dr. Russell brought this up
We
specifically.
talked about it this month at the meeting.
I talked about it with Dr. Russell and Mrs. Mayers when I was in board leadership, but it goes in conjunction with the vaping question. So I think whether we want to acknowledge it or not, they're tied together. So I think we need to understand if individual at school district sees student with vape, do they just say, hey, put that away, or do they isolate, detention, incident, report, understanding that mechanism? B, the second is how does that one vape detector work? How quickly does it ping the individual in the building to get there? Has that proven, what is that proven to give us in terms of dated information? And then talking to the SPOs and Mr. Miller. Remember, the SPOs are new. They're trained for this. Are there things that they are seeing in terms of vaping that they might have some opinions on? And then, how do we codify this tool with the dogs and potentially ways to make it work? It could be as easy as, hey, the first time we're going to use the dog is not even going to be in the building. It's just going to be
I was getting at.
walking the outside of the building with the cars and letting students know, hey, today we had police dogs walking the parking lot. When
Critically, that should be enough to say.
that bit should be enough that says
Right.
next
Hey,
week
now
they
they're
could-
looking.
next week they could have them in the building or right outside the building, right?
I agree with that. I agree with that wholeheartedly. So I guess the question though is, because there's like a web between the handbook and it's like all the components are all part of it. So do you want to do that as a board of the whole, or do you want to do that at policy next month, and then maybe Mr. Miller can come even during the policy meeting and speak to it?
So that's what I would suggest. I would
Yeah.
suggest we focus on the policy as a policy committee, and I can invite Mr. Miller, and we can come back with some of the answers to the questions. I just captured those, Mr. Saylor, and based on some of the conversation tonight. And then administration is tasked with developing a handbook or administrative regulations that serve as the ways in which we uphold these policies. Yep.
Guideposts, yeah.
Yep.
But I would just ask at the same time, because now we're looking at next year, there's still a now, right?
Yeah.
And what do we do now to understand, hey, is there really a problem on that third floor in that bathroom? Has anything happened in the past 2 weeks since the board meeting? What are the SPOs seeing and security seeing in terms of vaping? And capture, that issue. The vaping issue has been ad nauseum at board meetings for years now. And so, how is that happening?
Now,
Mm-hmm.
with the board of the whole.
And then next year, what
Right.
we do, moving forward.
Yeah, and then
Yeah.
the policy needs to get hammered out. Okay.
Right.
Well, I mean, isn't so in this search policy, I believe in the policy it says, Barb, that you could have dogs at the front doors tomorrow. and it says such searches normally will be conducted in a minimally intrusive manner, which that does comply, using screening methods such as dogs. It says here, a previous board authorized you to have dogs walk up and down the hallways. So, I mean, if we want to encourage you to do that, or say, I mean, short of saying, all right, on May 22nd, you're going to have dogs. I mean, no, exactly.
So this was last revised in 2020. So that's when Dr. Weston, you were on the board then, right? In April 2020. So the other board has already said.
But what are we
dogs.
just going to say? Please, we
Yeah.
encourage you to have a few or have a random dog search in the public areas of our school. I mean, anyway, that's all.
Okay, so that information.
I just don't want to waste time trying to develop a policy when we
The
can do
authority's
that.
there.
Well, April 2020 was a little janky.
That's when you
Lot
did.
going on in April
That
20.
don't say that because that's when you changed policy 103.
So it says, under certain circumstances, random or general searches, such searches will be conducted in a minimally intrusive manner using screening methods such as dogs or other animals. My question is, what are the certain circumstances? I want to hear more about the certain circumstances.
Probable. The issue.
Well, we have asked we have had this question already, and to Mr. Schubers have said, you have an instance where you catch a kid vaping in the school district, has a vape product on him. We consider that an incident that will allow us to then, as the superintendent, to call in the dogs.
Under
Correct.
school law. You don't need probable cause, you need
Yeah.
reasonable suspicion.
And we already have it.
So as far as the open questions in terms of implementation, if there would be cost associated with it, we would have to
Right.
approve it. So we'll have that information. Let's say we'll have that information in April.
Yes, let's work on that. That's our
Okay.
target. Yeah.
Okay.
I'll see if we can get Mr. Miller here.
Okay.
Yep.
No, April board meeting, not April policy meeting.
Okay.
Is that
I'm
okay?
sorry. Yeah.
Because
yeah,
what
I-
Mr. Saylor was saying about what is the now, or who said that? So yes, we need to continue to work on this in policy, but for the now, if you're already authorized through this policy,
Right.
we could theoretically take action immediately.
We could. That's correct.
The district, could,
That's good. That's correct.
unless there's a cost associated with it, in which we would have to approve a dollar figure from I don't know, is it a dog company? I don't know.
It's through the state police.
Hey, please. That's not it.
Let me get some more details from Mr.
Okay.
Miller, and then I'll follow up, and we will be prepared at the board meeting
Thank
to speak
you.
about it.
Just to talk, okay, so that's the now, and then the later,
Mm-hmm.
if that's the case for next month's policy meeting, we will expand upon that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that was search 226.
Okay. If it's all right, I'll move on then, and I really just wanted to touch base with the board. Again, this is an administrative regulation that I wanted to go over with the board. This is the how of upholding policy 718.1, service animals. We have a teacher, these policies, 718, I'm gonna go to those right now. 718, therapy dogs, 718.1, service animals in school were recently implemented by the district. We actually have a teacher who wants to bring in a service dog in training, seeing eye, as families raise puppies for a year with the purpose of socializing them, and they have to meet certain criteria along the way as they're raising this puppy. So we have a teacher that wants to bring in a service animal in training. So there's been an administrative regulation drafted so that the how of upholding policy while doing that is very clear to individuals. Now, this has happened in the past in the district. We have had a teacher who regularly brought in a dog in training who was then going off to Seeing Eye to see if it would be accepted and would pursue further training and serve an individual. Now that we have policy, though, I want to be really clear with individuals about how the policies must be upheld if we're going to do this. So, for the awareness of the committee, there's now an administrative reg that outlines that information. That's 718.1, excuse me, AR0. And much of this was developed by PSBA, that agency we go to. I want to call out the trainee part of it. And we have added these sub-statements to make it a bit more robust and very clear to staff what they need to consider if they're going to bring an animal into school as a service animal in training.
Subheadings under item 7, the bullet points, we added those? Or is that from the?
We added those. We added those to be more specific, yes. It was actually developed by the administration, which is often how administrative regulations are developed. And I think there was reference on the part of the administration and the staff to some other policy language that they found. Sometimes it's just directions. It's steps that we must follow to make sure we're upholding policy 718.1. So oftentimes in an admin reg, there aren't references. That would be acceptable.
Questions on bonding.
Bonding? Okay.
Bringing a service dog through a company before we had the policy, the company has an insurance rider. There are riders in place. You know, there's bonding and riders that are in place because it's through a company. This is a little bit different. This is just an individual that has a service dog that wants to bring it in. Where's the liability standard? Because it's not what the board. It's not the service dog that the board's buying. This is completely different. So.
In this specific instance.
No, the instance I had the question of when I found out that we already had service dogs. How was that covered? That was for the company, so that's how. This is different. This is teacher X wants to bring in their service dog in training. It's in training. It's not certified yet. It's been done in the past.
They are. They're gotten through an agency, Seeing Eye, yes.
Yeah, maybe it trickles down to the person that's handling the dog. Right.
Yeah, and I think it's a really important question that I
Yeah.
want to make sure I'm 100%
Feel like Jim did give an
accurate.
answer to
Yeah,
that,
I think Jim did, but that's okay. Let me follow up with the board on that and the committee in the notes. I'll speak to Mr. Weaver again because I think it's really important that the appropriate insurances are in place.
Yeah, because this is worded differently. This is like not worded that the dog was purchased by a Seeing Dog agency and the teacher is a certified trainer and is going through that process, or the agency is going to hold the bonding hold, the liability threshold. This is different. This is just, yeah.
And it's not the policy, remember. It's the admin reg. It helps them to uphold or know how to uphold the policy.
Oh, no, correct. But like as a board member, this is the first time I'm hearing that in the past we've had just teachers bringing their pets. And so my question would be,
Yeah, it was a little bit more.
where's the bonding? Who holds the liability for that? Yeah.
Reason to restrict it just to teachers? Because the Seeing Eye will often use teenagers to help raise puppies as well. My spouse, when she was growing up, often raised Seeing Eye puppies, and she actually brought her dog to school more often than not just to go through proper training.
Never been
Student that
presented.
has asked
No. Mm-mm.
That's
Yeah.
pretty. Yeah,
Yeah.
for students, I mean, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, really? Oh, I never heard of it.
Yep.
I mean, I've heard of the program. I just didn't know students would be.
qualification or certification that a trainer needs to go through? Okay. Do we ask them to provide their certification as part of this process? Because I don't know that I saw that. They would-
Handling.
Says it right there, certificate of insurance must be
Right.
provided, but there's no organization, because you're talking about an individual. Yeah.
I will add that clarification, Dr. Weston, if it does not appear. I need to review it and to make sure of that. But we can, yeah, it just emphasizes the importance of it. Right.
Right. So that is 718,
Right.
takeaway regarding
That one.
that
right.
one AR.
Right.
So that brings us to the end of the local policy. I'll let you finish your thought. And then
Thank you. Specify teacher training. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So before we move to closing items, Dr. Russell, if you could just for clarification and just edification, I suppose, could you speak a little bit to how the policy agenda is developed?
Sure. So the policy agenda is typically developed by myself, and sometimes the cabinet administration contributes, as does my administrative assistant. And there are 3 sections that are typically focused upon when we develop a policy agenda. The first is the review cycle policies. So we have an Excel spreadsheet with all of the policies that exist and when they've been last reviewed and which ones are up because they're approaching that 6-year mark. So we have that cycle that we pay attention to. As I mentioned this evening, I zeroed in on some curriculum-based policies for this evening from the review cycle. Next month, we might focus in on some of the financial policies that are up in the review cycle, and Mr. Weaver would come and he would speak to some of these things. So I pick a few of those review cycle policies, and I try to think about timing to try and keep the meeting to a reasonable time frame, anticipating some conversation, questions, etc. The second section is the PNN section. So what we are informed, the administration is informed of new policy language that comes down from the state. And it comes in the form of a PNN called a Policy News Network. And when the state is recommending the district or districts across the Commonwealth consider new policy language, those policies are incorporated in this PNN section. That's the second section. And then lastly, the third section is the local section. So when there are local topics of interest driven by policy, guided by policy, they are incorporated in this section. And this evening, examples of that really connected to some of our conversations around discrimination, anti-discrimination, and safety in our schools. When I develop the agenda, I review it with the board president and make sure that the board president is comfortable with what's being proposed. If the board president says okay, then it's published. It goes into board docs and it becomes public like 3 nights before, I think it's Saturday night at midnight, it becomes public for the public to review. We've been working to attach the backup because otherwise you need to be able to log in to see if I go up to policies, there's an active tab for me and a draft tab for me because I have different authorities in board docs. So what we do, because not everybody has that, if they access board docs from the public, then we want you to have the backup. So we've been attaching the policies that we'll focus on with the recommended revisions to each of those 3 sections. So
on
that
the agenda.
on the
policy.
agenda, so that the public has access just like administrators and board members do through that draft link. So an agenda is developed each month with some of those thoughts that go into each of those three main sections, of the agenda.
So, Dr. Russell, thank you for just running through the cycle of the how. If there would be, and this is very important, just so I want everybody to hear it at the same time, if there is something that the public would like addressed during a policy meeting as it pertains to a particular policy, and they've done some legwork in terms of their understanding of the policy, what would be the mode in which they would be able to potentially have something afforded your consideration to be added to the agenda? Because the agenda is what we go by in terms of running the meeting.
Right. So what they need to do is reach out to me and make that request.
And
then
I would say they should copy either the board as a whole, or they could copy just me.
the board president, but I
Right.
mean, what I was going to say, yes, I think that's a good practice always. What I was going to say is that I would review it with the board president, and then it gets to the full board, of course. But yes, you know, a public member can reach out to you as the board president, the board at large, and make that request as well. I put the agenda together, but the board develops policy.
And so, but we're again developing the policy and editing the policy as they already exist. So it's
Correct.
not as though, like, now there's public comment during a policy meeting and let's jump and go and address that. There's a process of reviewing the policies and doing kind of a little bit of homework on the front end prior to the policy meeting. So we
Right.
have come to the meeting with an agenda and marching orders of discussion points.
Right, and administration will typically incorporate any recommended revisions because maybe there are updates, and like we talked about tonight, maybe there are updates in the law that need to be incorporated into policy as we look at the review cycle policies. So yes, administration tends to do some legwork or homework coming into the policy committee meeting
About the suggestions.
about the suggestions or about the policies that appear on the agenda so that we have speaking points, we have talking points.
Okay. So does everybody understand what that means from a public perspective? That if you have a policy that you would like reviewed and you would like language either modified or changed, that you are empowered to attach the policy with your suggested changes and present it to Dr. Russell for consideration to be included in the policy committee meeting? Does everybody understand that? Okay. I just want to make sure that everybody realizes that there's an avenue to voice, rather than us have conversations month after month about not being heard. I want everybody to feel empowered to actually put the work in and present a policy as though they would like to see it adopted or revised for the public. And I know that that's a little different per se, like than the normal practice, but I want, rather than for there to be stagnation, I want the opportunity to be made that at least we have a heads up, like, hey, we need to talk about this for a little bit. And if the conversation is, we don't feel like these we could just talk about it, but it will be part of the agenda, so it won't be something that you won't have had the chance to weigh in on or reasoning behind or explanation around that maybe just needed clarification of best practice, et cetera.
Yes.
And I just feel like that may be a really good mechanism in terms of affording attention to the appropriate issues.
Yes, I would agree. Happy to take that approach.
Okay.
Yes,
So that will
absolutely.
be the standard of what we try to really uphold, and anyone can ask to have anything as part of a committee, but we have the agenda and it's a board agenda. So
Right, yes,
okay,
correct.
cool.
Great,
And that's the whole purpose of publishing it 3 days ahead of time, is that everybody has a heads up
right,
to do a little reading.
that's right.
It's really riveting stuff, the policy stuff.
Like a grad course.
Yeah. Okay. Does anybody want to talk about anything else before we move to closing items? Ms. Benza, you're good? Okay. First policy subcommittee is very exciting stuff. Yeah. Mr. Cullen, I didn't put you on the spot yet this evening. Do you have anything to add? Okay. Anyone else? Okay, 5, closing items. The minutes will be attached following the meeting, along with the recording. Our next meeting is April 16th. And with that, I come to 5.03, which is the notice of video disclaimer, and 5.04 is adjournment. Thank you, everyone, and we will see you next month.